Imagine if you were chosen to run a restaurant that only serves the dead. Of course, you'd be rewarded with a lot of money, around $1 billion. Would you open the doors to these ghosts from the past to learn a bit about their stories and become a billionaire? Well, our story begins here. In the subway, a message informs passengers that the train is not available due to an accident, causing everyone to complain about being late for their appointments. Amidst the crowd, a girl stands out. Some workers wonder what's happening and why there's blood at the site. A voice below says it seems she passed away shortly after the accident. The girl then climbs the station stairs and leaves as the area is closed off for investigation. Behind her are two men and an ambulance. The girl's stomach growls. As she walks away, a homeless man notices her, calls out, and asks if she's hungry. She confirms and he directs her down the main road. As she walks, another woman gives her directions, followed by another man, and finally another who tells her to turn down an alley to arrive. The girl finally reaches her destination and finds herself in front of a meal-serving restaurant. She approaches the door and suddenly everything is different. Inside, people are ordering food, eating, laughing, and talking. A blonde man welcomes her and asks if it's her first time there, as he's never seen her before. He quickly takes other customers' orders and guides the girl. Delicious foods are being prepared, and the customers who receive them are very satisfied. The girl is surprised as everyone praises the chef and repeats their orders, her stomach continuing to rumble. The man asks if she's decided what to order. The girl explains she was hungry and everyone said she could come here, but she has no money. The man smiles and assures her it's okay. She doesn't need to pay, just needs to say what she wants. The girl is filled with joy, asking if she can really eat, and the man confirms. One might wonder how he can run his business without payments, but it works because his shop is a bit different from others. People often wonder where the shop is. It's in a deep dawn where all life sleeps. A driver passes by in his car. A man holds a cup in his hand while looking out the window. The shop owner says he made friends with the streetlights a long time ago. It's a place for those who can't sleep even in the dark. Perhaps it's more than that. It's where a lonely being remains in deep sadness. Inside the shop, a man approaches the cook's room. He asks if the establishment is still open. As the cook finishes preparing a dish, he enthusiastically confirms and welcomes him with open arms. This place is the restaurant of life after death. Under a scorching sun, sweat drips onto a bag of cement. To make matters worse, the elevator is broken. Lee Kang-jim, 28 years old, works construction in the highest temperatures of the Korean summer. He sees today's salary is 140,000 won. Considering the cost of living, he's still short about 1.3 million won. Lee calculates the bills he has to pay and notes there are 3 months left. However, if he works for 10 more days, he'll be ready to pay the second trimester's tuition, so he must hold on. Lying in bed, he wonders if he should nap before his next part-time job. Suddenly, an unknown number calls him. Lee is annoyed that someone called just as he was about to rest. Upon answering, he immediately states he has no insurance, won't go to church, and won't change his phone. The person on the line introduces himself as Shin Suho, a lawyer from Seo and Bake, and asks if he's speaking to Mr. Lee. The protagonist becomes curious about the lawyer's sudden call. He confirms his identity and asks what the problem is, suspecting a scam. The man says he can think what he wants, but there's something he'd like to tell him and asks if they can meet. Shin says he sent the address via SMS and asks if Lee received it. When Lee checks, he sees the location is in the middle of Gangnam. The lawyer says it's a story that will please him and says he'll wait for Lee there. As the protagonist is about to say something, he realizes the lawyer has hung up. Wondering who on earth this person is, Lee eventually goes to the arranged place. He finds it strange that the man asked to meet in such a busy place, thinking it's a relief. Suddenly, someone calls out to him. Handing over a black card from the general law office, the person says it's a pleasure to meet him and introduces himself as the lawyer who called. Lee looks at the card and says the pleasure is all his, wondering if this business is legitimate. Then he asks what the summons is about. The man says it might be a bit confusing, but he'd like to inform him about the will of Kim Bak-rae. Lee doesn't recognize the person. The lawyer says this lady left something for him, a building worth 8.2 billion won as an inheritance. This leaves Lee completely bewildered, making him question if the amount is correct. But Shin confirms, leaving Lee open-mouthed. He wonders what on earth is happening and why everything seems so strange. But then he apologizes and tells the lawyer that he must have the wrong person, asserting that he has never heard of this woman's name, and then after his parents die, he lost contact with all of his relatives, having no one to leave an inheritance to. Lee repeats what he said, affirming that it's not him, so the lawyer should find another Lee Kang-jin. Shin begins to list all the important characteristics of Lee's life and informs him that Ms. Kim Bak-rae is his great-uncle's sister. Lee asks how he could say such a thing in front of people. The lawyer apologizes for disclosing personal information in public, but confirms that he is the person he's looking for and asks him to follow to see the building in person. Lee wonders about what was said and thinks if the building left to him is the one in front of him. Shin then starts to introduce the floors of the building. There's a house above the shop, making Lee ask if someone is already renting the restaurant. Shin informs him that it's vacant, so he can move in immediately, and the official transfer of the title would occur in 5 years. He questions if 5 years isn't too short a time since he hasn't even said he would accept. The lawyer warns that if he doesn't want to accept, the building will automatically be donated to society. But as a condition of the inheritance, he will have to manage the restaurant for the next 5 years. Lee says he's not good at cooking and asks what will happen if he fails. The lawyer states there's no such thing as a good deal. And Lee questions the various complications he will have by taking on this commitment. Shin advises that if he signs the contract and accepts the terms, his company will cover all costs. Lee checks the terms, sees that it's true, and Shin says that if he still doesn't want it, they can donate the building. Our protagonist says it's obviously suspicious and obviously hard to believe. A distant relative whose name he doesn't even know suddenly makes him inherit an entire building in Gangnam worth 8.2 billion. He thinks it would take 150 years to earn that amount working. With many doubts, Lee asks if it's a scam, and the lawyer replies that it's not. He then says he still has to look at the contract several times and asks if there aren't any other unusual conditions. The lawyer says there are rules about managing the restaurant, but if he keeps them, there won't be any problems. Lee examines the rules and sees that they are unique, wondering how strange these guidelines are. Shin asks if he has made his decision, and Lee finally decides. He affirms with a smile on his face that he will accept. The lawyer then asks him to sign and start the business the next day. Lee thought it shouldn't be a scam because of the contract, but he wouldn't know what would happen if it were. In the end, he thinks he has nothing to lose. The lawyer, with a frightening expression, warns that Lee must pay attention to the operating hours, and that if he breaks the rules 3 times, he will lose the inheritance rights. Shin then warns that they will be watching him and leaves. Lee, in turn, wishes him a good day, thus staying alone in the place. Then he realizes, for the next 5 years, that will be his home. Lee checks that the ingredients are ready, and asks if the guys from before were running the business until the day before. He realizes that the preparation is perfect except for him because Lee Kang, 28 years old, didn't know how to cook properly. Lee understands that he can't just sell instant noodles and fried eggs to his customers. But he accidentally steps on a book, wondering what it was and where it fell from. He then picked up the book and leafed through it, believing it was the recipe notebook that the previous owner used. In it, there were various recipes with pork, rice, and garlic. Lee then decides to practice the menu, convincing himself that it's not because he wants to eat something that he's hungry, but he realizes that he's feeling tired and believes that the letters are moving. The recipe he previously saw transforms into fried pork with garlic, and a strange aura surrounds Lee's body. Lee then begins to prepare his fried pork, doing everything with exact perfection, and preparing a dish beautiful to behold. The fried pork with garlic and the freshness of the lemon is ready. He thinks it turned out better than expected and didn't know he had so much talent for cooking. He comments that it's absurd because there were many dishes he ruined while living alone. Lee felt his hands move on their own as if they already knew how to cook. Then he decides to taste it to see if it's as good as it looks, putting a piece of the food in his mouth and confirming that it was delicious. Lee realizes that he just followed the recipe and it's great. With that notebook, he won't need to worry about his business anymore. Someone then knocks on his door. Lee apologizes, stating that they are still preparing for sales. But it was already 11 o'clock at night, and he thinks how time passed so quickly. Then he quickly corrects the mistake with the customer and affirms that they are open while putting on his apron. He thinks he shouldn't be nervous and should welcome his first guest. While welcoming the person, something caught his attention. His customer is a beautiful woman wearing a traditional Korean dress. Lee welcomes her and asks if it's just her who came, while thinking that the young woman seemed to be a high school student. But suddenly she makes a request for him to bring some soju. Lee questions if she was talking to him, and the girl asks if he's deaf, repeating her request again. The cook thinks that no matter how much he looks, she seems like a young student but asks with a lot of confidence, so he wonders how old she might be. In his days as a beginner working part-time, the busiest day was Friday night. One day he served a drink to a certain table without checking the identity, and perhaps because of the price of the food, Emiters reported to the police and he was suspended for a month. But now he was a professional at his job, and he wouldn't fall for the same trick twice. He then approaches the woman kindly and asks if he could verify her identity. She questions about the order, and he affirms that it could be a driver's license or passport. The woman says she doesn't have that, which confuses the man. She confidently says that he doesn't need to worry about that, because she also doesn't have money, again asking for him to just bring her some soju. Lee despairs, thinking he's never seen this kind of person before, and the woman starts to get bored. She states that the man doesn't seem to know much about that place. He awkwardly says he knows about the rules, remembering that the lawyer said he would be watching him. Lee thinks that maybe this means he's being watched through the restaurant's camera. He seems convinced that there's a hidden camera watching him, but the woman cuts him off, saying she doesn't know what he's thinking, but she would like her drink right away. Lee asks if she wouldn't prefer fried pork with garlic instead of alcohol, and the woman declines. He, however, runs to the kitchen and says he will give her one for evaluation without the need for payment. The woman then notices something different. She looks at her reflection in a refrigerator, finding her image odd. Shortly after, the man returns with the food but hears a noise on the floor. It's a wine bottle. Lee then panics because the girl was drinking several bottles of alcohol. Moreover, she drank a lot, and if he gets reported, the worst could happen. He cries, thinking he could be suspended for 2 months on his first day of work. The man asks where the student lives, thinking he needs to send her home before she reports him. She ponders the question and replies that she lives in a house of Kim Champan in Peach Valley in Jeonju. The cook doesn't recognize any of what was said. The woman asks why he's questioning her about this, and Lee asks if she doesn't know. Then a person enters the store, and Lee thinks he's doomed because a customer showed up at a time like this. The man introduces himself as Kang Du-chia from JS Finance. He says that since the restaurant owner has changed, he's there to say hello and share his account. The cook has never heard of this company, and Kang recognizes the woman who is giving him trouble, calling her older sister. Our cook is surprised by this because she looked like a high school student. The man warns that she may look young, but is old, relieving the protagonist. Kang says he can't believe he doesn't know her, asking if Lee didn't receive the delivery. Stating that the cook has no idea what he's talking about, he thinks he showed up there in a hurry. He then hands over his business card, saying he'll be back soon and will obtain the acceptance of the guarantee. But he holds Lee's wrist and says he must tell him something first. He warns to never believe what the eyes see, leaving the cook confused and calling his sister to leave. The woman gets irritated because the other customers are too weak to occupy the same space as her, but she's content that she's had enough and agrees to leave. Kang says goodbye and wishes good luck with the business. The cook says he wanted to work hard, but there are no customers. Kang tells the cook not to worry, that other customers will soon come after finding the smell. Lee says the previous owner seemed to be very good, and Kang says she was the best. When asked what kind of person she was, Kang says she was a good person, like a paradise for them. Laughing as he talked, he states he would like some cooked saccharin wheat jelly for tomorrow. And even though it's a bit rude to say this on his first visit, he would like to bring his team to dine there. This excites Lee like a party, saying it would be great. The man affirms he will come the next day at 11 o'clock at night, which the cook catches. He then stands up after the bow to say one more thing, and realizes he can no longer see any of them, wondering how they can be so fast. Alone in the kitchen, Lee thinks it's been a while since the two left, and that it's Friday night at midnight. It shouldn't be possible to have no customers there. He then wonders if it's because the store is old, but two people smell the garlic and approach the store asking if it's open and ordering 3 garlic dishes. Lee tells them to sit down and he'll bring it immediately. While cooking for the girls, the woman asks if the owner has changed, and he says he's now responsible for the restaurant. The woman with a frightening look says he will have a hard time from now on. Lee doesn't understand and wonders if it's fashionable to speak in such a profound way. He asks why he would have hard times, and the women warn it's because of the people who frequent there, because they are not ordinary people. The cook jokingly asks if they are ghosts since they are not ordinary people, receiving a frightening smile from them, which scares him with the possibility of being right. The women then laugh and the man believes he was mocked. One of them approaches the cook and says they will take 2 bottles of soju. Lee thinks the joke just now gave him chills, but they seem to be lively and fun customers. He then delivers the order of garlic dishes to the girls, which makes them happy. The 3 eat in common that it's delicious. After finishing their dishes, they ask if they should leave, and Lee quickly appears to help with the payment. The women, however, say they don't have money, which leaves the cook unsure what to do. They then say they are late and start to leave, but Lee calls them desperately, saying they have to pay for the food. The blonde asks if he needs money, and the cook says it's obvious because he's doing business to make money. The woman says she understands and starts to prophesy some strange numbers, asking him to write them down and questioning if he knows how to do that. Moreover, she approaches, warning him not to believe everything he sees. The cook asks what that would be, but when he realizes it, they've already disappeared, making Lee scream for them, begging them to pay the bill. Our cook thinks it was said that he could do anything as long as he followed the rules. He remembers he didn't earn a cent the day before and affirms that today will be different. Then he opens the book, ready to practice, and looks at the book, searching for a recipe that can be prepared and served quickly. Kimchi stew, kimchi rice, and spicy pork rice should be enough. But he notices something wrong with the handwriting since the letters start to come out of the book. Lee thinks about what happened now, and believes he's seeing things because he's tired, but he can read everything else normally and only the notebook is strange. Then he realizes that maybe there's something with this recipe book. Various delicious dishes appear being made in his mind, and suddenly a knife appears in Lee's hand. He begins to cook without control of his body and now confirms that there was indeed something strange. The only thing he knew how to cook was fried eggs, and there's no way he could be so good with a knife. Lee then realizes that this must be due to Ms. Kim's notebook. He says he's not sure yet and decides to try a more difficult dish. Royal bellflower japchae is what he will make because he has never heard of it, and since it's japchae, there will surely be a lot of work. He thinks it already looks difficult to cook just by looking at the name, and if he can make this dish, he will have his answer. After a few moments, what he suspected happened. He had prepared the recipe to perfection, surprised that he can cook just by reading the recipe from the notebook. But he thinks it has to be tasty to be able to sell it and taste it to feel the flavor. A memory of when Lee was little comes to his mind. His mother gave him food and asked if it was good. Lee, in turn, said that his mother's japchae is the best. Finally, his mother asked him to eat slowly because his stomach might hurt. Lee remembers all this while eating what he prepared, becoming emotional. He thinks it's not the same recipe his mother made for him, but it has the same taste as that time, thus placing the dish on his table. He slaps his face, thinking it's not the time to be emotional, thus trying to wake up to reality. Lee thinks about who that lady was and how she made that recipe. Many strange things have been happening since he arrived at that place. The notebook has strange powers, and every customer who came there had no money besides saying something strange to Lee. They warned him not to believe everything his eyes see. There was even a lawyer who said he would watch to see if he was doing well. At this point, Lee was confused whether the legacy of that lady was luck or misfortune for him. Abruptly, a man enters his establishment carrying lettuces and shouts good morning. The man greets Lee, affirming that he is better than he thought, and Lee asks who he is. The man introduces himself as Suyang, the one responsible for the ingredients, and Suwei, the one responsible for the alcohol. They say they are the younger brothers of the lawyer he had met earlier. Lee thinks they look nothing alike, while the man says they must not have had many customers the day before. Lee asks if he can tell just by looking, and Suyang informs that he has been stocking the fridge for a long time. Ms. Kim Bok-rae was like his mother, and the restaurant was also her home. That's why he asks somewhat aggressively to take good care of the restaurant, and if he needs anything, he is free to call them. After the clarifications, Suyang asks how the business was the day before, and Lee warns that there was nothing special except for the customers who had no money. Lee asks if the restaurant is free and how he should work with this loss. Suyang claims that it may seem like a loss, but it's a good deal that will return to the owner later. Lee asks about what was said, and Sunam, in a frightening way, warns that if he dies, he will get everything back. Our cook, however, thinks it's no use receiving things after dying, and changes the subject, asking if they know JS Finance, since no matter how much he searches, he can't find it. The man advises that they do business there too, and only those who know it is like a subcontracted company. Lee asks why do business in a place like this because it could go bankrupt, and Suyang asks him not to worry. Even if the world goes bankrupt, JS Finance never will. The two then laugh, saying that if the world sinks, it might be a problem, while Lee thinks none of his questions were answered. The men then say goodbye and warn that anything Lee needs, they will be available. Suyang comments to his brother that he misses their mother and calls him to see her. Despite being busy, the other brother accepts and they go their way. Lee then thinks they must have gone to visit the tomb of the former owner, and one day he will ask where it is to go along. But thinking about it, those people in the end did not answer anything about his question. Lee thinks that no matter if everything is being paid, it's good that he prepares an emergency fund. He opened a store earlier and also made a new menu. However, there were no customers. Lee gets angry because the restaurants next door are always full of customers, but his had none. He then has the idea to cook something and attract customers. Some time passes, and finally, a customer arrives and Lee greets him with happiness. He is confused that his customer is a child and wonders where his parents might be. The child says he would like a bowl of pork rice, and Lee asks if he came there alone. The child says yes, and the cook says he doesn't know what's happening, but asks him to wait just a moment, thus preparing the bowl of pork rice and egg roll to perfection. Lee delivers the order to the boy and says that if he needs more side dishes, just let him know. The boy then takes his spoon and eats, leaving Lee proud that he is eating a lot. Part of the dish had already been eaten, and Lee says he added more meat, so he asks the boy to eat slowly, making him thoughtful. Our cook says he's eating very well and thinks he likes spicy stir-fried pork. Lee comments that his favorite side dish is this dish, and if eaten with his mother's fried egg, it's like a bowl of rice. The boy then stops eating, and Lee says he would have liked to eat that all day. That boy then says that the dish he made has the same taste as his mother's food, and he could eat it all day. He then eats more, and while eating, he starts to cry. Lee didn't expect that reaction, and tries to talk to the child, but he doesn't stop crying. Our cook asks why he's crying, and the boy says it's because he misses his mother. Lee affirms that he will always be there, and that he can come to eat whenever he wants, but the boy denies. Saying he has to go see his mother, Lee asks where she is. The boy thanks him for the help. As a wave forms on the floor, he says he now knows where he should be, thanking again and disappearing amid bright lights. Lee closes his eyes due to the brightness. After that, he wonders what the hell happened since the child had disappeared. A note of money falls on Lee's eyes, and he realizes it's a 1,000,001 note. Lee is astounded that a 1,000,001 check fell from the sky and wonders what's wrong with that place. Shin in the background says that to be precise, something that makes ghosts happy is happening, which catches Lee's attention. He is surprised that Shin is there and asks when he arrived, but changes the question to another. He questions the lawyer what he means by ghost, and the same asks if it makes sense that a check falls from the sky suddenly. Lee asks what the hell is going on there. Every customer who came only said suspicious things. All were strange, and there was a difficult place to understand. The lawyer then laughs, and more that this place is the border between the underworld and the earth. He explains that ghosts come and go to this restaurant, which frightens our cook. Shin asks if he hadn't realized, and Lee begins to understand where he got himself into. The lawyer says he didn't expect him to understand all at once, and he explains that Lee's suspicions were correct. This place is where ghosts eat like humans. Ghosts miss the food they ate during their lives. They then come here in search of a drink to warm them up. Shin warns that he doesn't need to worry about a ghost hurting him, because they will protect him if he protects them, explaining that it's like getting angry when your only favorite dog gets hurt. Lee admits that doing business with ghosts is still a bit scary. Shin then asks if he's scared because they're ghosts instead of people, and Lee starts to think about all the bad people who have passed through his life, concluding that there are more scary people than ghosts. Lee then says it's good to be a little cautious, but since he's been told that, he'll try to do his best. Still, Lee questions about the people who don't pay, and Shin says they will be punished after death. On his phone's search engine, Lee searches for ghosts. He comments that as if it wasn't enough that drones deliver packages, there are also ghosts nowadays. A ghost is a state in which a person has died. A person who lives a happy life and has a comfortable death becomes a good ghost. But if they are bad, the opposite can happen, and they turn into bad ghosts that harm humans. To exorcise ghosts, just make red bean porridge since they don't like the color red. The second step is to call a shaman and threaten them. The third step is to welcome and respect them, letting them leave on their own. Lee then believes that if he feeds them well, they will leave on their own. But still, this is strange. Our cook then wonders if everything is really okay. But he comes back to reality thinking that he shouldn't be cultivating these ideas in his head. He's heard of people killing other people, but never of ghosts killing people. Lee then puts on his apron and says that just to be sure, he'll make red bean porridge. While preparing the porridge, he thinks about the man from JS Finance who must also be a ghost, remembering that he said he would be there for dinner tonight with his team, so there will be several of them. Suddenly, the same man appears in the kitchen, catching Lee's attention, who gets startled. The man asks if he was scared because of him, and Lee, a bit flustered, responds that there wouldn't be anything to be surprised about. He's asked if Lee had forgotten about his company's dinner, and he affirms he hasn't, inviting him in. Several people then enter the establishment with a very friendly demeanor, but Lee looks at them suspiciously. The men recognize a smell, wondering if it would be what they are thinking. And Lee, for his part, believes that the anti-ghost dish he made was having an effect. Then the men call Lee to their table, which makes him very scared. After calling the cook, they question if he had made red bean porridge for them. Lee, a bit awkwardly pleased that they liked it, says he did. And one of the men catches Lee's attention, saying that it seems like he's already heard about the store's story. But contrary to what most people say, ghosts are not picky about food. The man tells him not to be afraid because they are not much different from humans, they're just employees. Says that what he was saying made sense and feels ashamed for being afraid of them, and decides that, as an apology, he will try his best to please them. Presenting today's dish, pork jelly with buckwheat and seasoned vegetables. Lee had made perfect dishes with everything they liked. One of the men says it's delicious, while another speaks excitedly that you will go there often. The employee asks the cook to eat with them, but Lee says he has business to do. That man then warns that Lee won't have any customers while they are there, which intrigues him. He explains that most ghosts are indebted to JS Finance, and people in debt don't go where their creditors are. After hearing what was said, Lee remembers that he received a check and takes it out of his pocket. The man reads that the issuer is Stidagarba, realizing that the cook has already had clients who ascended to heaven. He explains that the issuer differs depending on who ascended to heaven and that that person must have been good. Lee understands that the boy who came to his store was a ghost. The man explains that Stidagarba is simple. He is the richest philanthropist in the underworld. Lee asks if there is money in the afterlife, and the man explains that's what JS Finance is for, but the currency of the underworld is different. Basically, the function of buying goods or making transactions was the same. But in the underworld, one can reduce sins with money, and Lee asks if they have money when they die. The man affirms that everyone has an account at JS Finance from the moment they are born. Lee then asks if he also has an account, and he explains that yes, saying that if you do good things, money will be deposited, and if you do something bad, it will be reduced. In other words, if you have a lot of money in the underworld, it means you did good things in your life. Not having money in the underworld means you sinned a lot. Lee asks if they can see how much they have, and the man explains that while they are alive, they cannot. He advises that there's no need to be anxious because as he manages the one-meal restaurant, he will always have a lot of money, informing that the people who managed this place always became VIPs. Finally, he informs that it's impossible to exchange real money for underworld money, but the opposite is possible. Without further doubts, Lee just asks him to transfer the money to his JS account, which is accepted. Cleaning equipment falls to the ground, and Lee remembers the lottery. The blonde from before had given him a number, but it gave 50,000 won. He thinks he would donate if he won first place to accumulate his merit, but he starts to think about the amount received, and sees that it was exactly the value of the bill. Again in the restaurant, the women comment on what happened, and the blonde says she didn't expect to win. She says that if she had known it would be like this, she would have entered the dream of her nephew and niece. One of the girls says that's very cool, and Lee thinks that at first he was scared. But if you pay attention, they are more like a person than he thought. Someone enters the store and our cook welcomes them. It was the customer from last time. The woman asks what he's looking at and asks him to bring her some soju. Lee rushes to get it, while thinking that she looks different from last time, looking a bit older. He thinks that looking at the characteristics of Hanbok, she must be quite old for ghosts. He believes he has to apologize because he went too far last time. Lee then apologizes with a bow and Hambok accepts with her broad generosity. She then asks the cook's name, who introduces himself as Lee Kang-jin. Hambok asks which family he is from, and the cook responds that he is from Dakshin Lee. The woman says she knows the cook's family well and has a good relationship with his grandparents. She introduces herself as Soi from the Divine Kim family, and as she is in a position of debt, she asks him to speak comfortably with her. Lee then decides to ask how long she has been dead, but the woman warns that she should tell him something first, which puts Lee on alert. She warns that for those who could not ascend to heaven and became ghosts, one should not ask about their past. Lee says he's sorry and apologizes for his discourtesy. The woman says that the ghosts who come here are those who can't even pick up and eat the food from the ancestral rites. So there's nothing good about bringing up their past, but since he's such a good person, she gave him this advice. Lee looks at his reflection in the table and thinks that if what the woman said is right, there shouldn't be many customers, thinking she wants to scare him. Suddenly someone asks for permission, asking if all the maiden ghosts have left. Lee then says they just left, asking him to sit down and say if he wants to eat something. Several people say they won't hesitate, entering the store in droves wanting to eat. Lee tells them to wait and doesn't understand why this is happening so suddenly. People start making various orders, which drives our cook crazy. Lee apologizes and says today's menu is fried pork with garlic and rice. The people then complain because the last owner did everything for them. Our cook apologizes, saying he hasn't been open for long, but he sees a different person in the crowd. He starts to enter the kitchen, and Lee tries to reprimand him, but he grabs a knife and says he will help him, saying that now everyone can order whatever they want to eat. The blonde asks if he was surprised by his entrance since he used to help his mother while he was there. He says Lee can make the stir-fried pork while he takes care of the other dishes. Lee wonders who he's calling mother but understands it's okay if he does that. Sometime later, all the dishes were being served, and the blonde set one aside for him. A kimchi stew in the skillet. Lee thanks him because he survived thanks to him, and the blonde says it's okay because it's natural to feel difficulty the first time. Lee says he was shocked because he never had so many customers and asks how he could be so good at it. Suddenly, more people show up at the restaurant asking to be served whatever they have as quickly as possible. With only 30 minutes left to close, 3 more customers arrived. When Lee was about to say something, the blonde asks what they think of a kimchi stew. Those men get excited about the proposal, and the blonde asks him not to worry because they will finish eating quickly, asking him to bring the stew first while he fries the eggs in a minute. Lee approaches the table to deliver the stew, but he notices something different. He recognizes one of the men as Chien Hyun, making him confused. Lee introduces himself, asking if he remembers him, and says that when he was in the orphanage, he used to visit him every holiday. The man understands the situation but says he's sorry. He claims that when you become a ghost, your memories of the past life get bad, so he doesn't remember. The man states that it's almost 1 o'clock, and since they don't have much time, they couldn't have a drink together. Lee is disconcerted by what he heard and asks what it means that he doesn't remember him. Lee starts to get emotional and is stopped by the blonde, who asks him to calm down. That person was very important to him. Lee can't control himself and starts to cite several of his memories. The man in turn apologizes, stating that he doesn't remember. While venting and almost crying, the blonde tries to intervene more, demanding rigorously that he stop this scene, because this is not something he can interfere with. It is said that one should only talk about life stories with living people. Ghosts are made of resentment, and it's not good for living people to hear their stories. A man in a suit stands up cursing and saying that Lee made the atmosphere bad. He explains that it happened because he was fired from his company because of his manager. Another ghost questions if he thinks he was the only one unjustly betrayed, saying that he saved hundreds of people, but when he died, he became a ghost. Another one starts to cry, saying that he designed several buildings, but after making a mistake, his life turned out like this. Finally, another ghost tells his story. He had flat feet, enlisted in the army, and during the physical exam, he had an accident. He starts to think about why suddenly everyone started to tell about themselves. While drinking, another man says he was careless, because at that time he was wrong to blindly grab the person since they were gangsters with knives. That was bad luck. Lee says he remembers that his Hyung always said that justice is on the side of the weak. That's why he became a policeman. But he clenches his fist in anger when he thinks about the gangsters. The blonde asks if he has eaten and that they should eat together because there's not much time left until 1 o'clock. Lee tries to say something about the customers, but the blonde says he will take care of it. Sometime later, the blonde tastes the soup and says excitedly that soju is the best when it comes to kimchi stew. Lee then asks if he's used to cooking because his skills were great. The blonde gets embarrassed, saying he's still a child in the business, and Lee affirms that he's very good. The same then thanks him and says he could do something even better if he had the ingredients and more time. Lee then starts to think about the man's skills, concluding that he needs him. He says it's his first time as a cook and asks if he could help him in the restaurant. The blonde says that's a good idea and accepts, since he has nothing to do. He affirms that it will be a pleasure to work alongside Lee and introduces himself as Ba Young-soo. They realize they are the same age and decide to start talking casually. Lee accepts with enthusiasm. There's only 1 minute left until 1 in the morning. The ghosts hurry to drink as fast as possible. After finishing his drink, the cook's friend approaches, apologizing for not remembering Lee. and he says he might be a ghost now, but if someone harms him, just call his name 3 times and he will beat them up. The clock strikes 1 o'clock, and Kyung says goodbye, disappearing. Not only him, but all the ghosts were disappearing, leaving Lee alone. He places his hand under the table, and he thinks that he still can't believe his friend is dead. He would like to alleviate his regret, but doesn't know how he can help. While crying, Lee says it was good they met, and that he will always make as much food as he wants. Suddenly, something catches his attention. 2 people enter his establishment asking if it's still open, and Lee greets them saying yes. The men, already drunk, ask for a serving of soju. One of them questions how many glasses would be a serving, and the other says that if it's enough to eat alone, it's not a serving. Lee thinks they are completely drunk, but since they came after 1 a.m., they must be living people. The man, ironically, points to the menu, asking if that's all they have. Lee is embarrassed and says yes. The older of the men asks for 2 stir-fried pork with soju, and Lee affirms that he will bring it. Lee thinks he responded naturally, but if it's past 1 a.m., humans should be able to enter. The cook then delivers their orders and asks them to enjoy their meal. The older man takes a bite and is surprised, saying it's delicious and asking if he was the one who seasoned it. Lee confirms that he did. The man asks if the menu changes every day or if he would only sell this. Lee says he hasn't decided yet but can make whatever menu they desire. That man then asks if he can have seaweed soup for lunch the next day and says he will make a reservation for 2. Lee accepts and they finish their dishes, feeling very full. The older one asks the other to wake up because there's a substitute driver outside. The drunk, however, says there's no right path and it's time to go home without regrets. They thank Lee for the food and he wishes them a safe return home. Lee seems curious. He discovered something in his book, a way to make seaweed soup with much more flavor, and he remembers that his friend also liked it and says he will prepare it for him just as he will for the customer who made the reservation. Lee starts cooking according to his recipe. He wonders why it's written that way but continues normally. Lee follows the preparation precisely, and upon tasting a bit of what he made, he realizes it was delicious. Grandma Kim's exclusive seaweed soup was complete. A woman then enters his establishment, along with the man who made the reservation, who says hello. The woman comments that it's cool, and the man says they must have turned on the air conditioning. Lee thinks this is strange because he never turned on the air conditioning. The woman comments that the place is worn out to be a restaurant in Gangnam, and the man tells her to focus on the food. Lee admits that the interior design of the place is a bit outdated, and delivers the seaweed soup that the man had ordered. The 2 start eating, and the woman asks if the cook learned his techniques in Angang Lee, but he says he doesn't know that place. The woman says that this place is the province of her mother's hometown, and she remembers eating a lot of it when she was pregnant, informing that the seaweed soup has the same taste as the one her mother made. Lee says it's fascinating, but he's never been there, and the woman comments that he seems young, but is great. Our cook thanks her and asks if she wants him to wrap it up for takeout, which makes her happy and grateful. The man asks how the food is and if he did a good job, while the woman says her husband is good with restaurants. The man then asks how much the dish he ate costs, and Lee says he can pay whatever he wants. He then asks if he can pay 1,000 won, and his wife says that will attract many wrongdoers looking for free meals. Lee knows that's true, but if he breaks the rules, he'll go back to his old apartment. The woman says she wants to come back often and believes it wouldn't be bad if he established a base price there, handing 15,000 won to Lee. The woman thanks him for the service and says goodbye. Lee hadn't thought he would feel disconcerted by receiving so much money, and it would be convenient for him and others if a price was set for the living side. He then decided to ask his lawyer about it another time. A man is surprised that Lee traded with living people. They were the employees from before who praised Lee for his entrepreneurial vision, stating that his mother only sold to ghosts. Lee says he's happy to have the book because if it were up to him, the restaurant would be lost, and Soo-young questions if he was really that bad. And he explains that he knows only a few recipes, while the other ghosts says he can ask anything. Lee questions about the air conditioning case if the temperature of the place has to do with the ghosts, which the man confirms. In places where many ghosts pass, the temperature drops because negative energy accumulates. The longer in contact, the more yin energy accumulates, and at some point, ghosts may be seen outside the store. Lee, a little scared, says he sees ghosts there every day. And the man said that's how real ghosts are, stating that the ghosts from outside are a bit different from the ones he sees, making Lee curious about what they are like. He then explains that Lee will know when he sees them. Finally, our cook says he would like to ask one more thing, and questions if the 2 are human. Lee starts laughing while saying that the 2 can't be ghosts, and even if they are, they're not scary. Those men then smile and confirm that they are living people. Faced with this and afraid, Lee says he understands. But he had one more question, how living people like them worked there if they couldn't see ghosts. They explained that they were orphans, so the mother raised them, and that's how they joined. When the mother was busy, the maiden ghosts took care of them, which made them want to do something related. Lee tries to connect the dots, commenting that lawyer Shin is the eldest son, Mr. Sugway is the third, and Mr. Soo-young the second. Soo-young interrupts, saying there's one more, Shin Sujo, their youngest, who works in interior design. Lee is happy about this because he would like to change the interior of the store and says he will ask for his advice. Soo-young understands and says he will call them. After a while, it was almost time to open the store. Suyang, along with his brother, say goodbye, wishing a good night. Lee asks them to come back again. After the farewell, he stops and thinks about the one-meal restaurant, a place where both the living and the dead can come. He realizes that this is actually good, because it's a place open to everyone. It was said that this is the border between this world and the afterlife, and that is absolutely correct. The next day, Shin comments that he was surprised when Lee called, and it seems that Lee is worried about the living customers. Lee confirms that he is because when they come, it's natural to ask for the price, and there's no mention in the contract about them. The lawyer then thinks about the matter. Shin explains that this restaurant is not a place to make money, but to serve those who are hungry. He asks if it's necessary to set a price, and even if people don't pay, it will still be deposited. Lee comments that if customers decide not to pay for the food with bad intentions, they are committing sins. He says he was willing to accept whatever they gave him, but he thought he might be inducing them to sin. This made Shin think about the matter. Shin says that if he thinks that way, there's nothing they can do, deciding then to call someone for advice because there's no underworld law on this side. Lee comments that Mrs. Kim is already dead, and Shin asks if he remembers what her job was. Lee then understands that if he is an underworld lawyer, he must be able to be in contact with it. Shin talks on the phone and comes to a conclusion. After hanging up, Lee asks what she had said, and Shin, with a serious expression, replies that the mother answered him, telling him to solve it himself. Shin explains that she said he only has to follow the existing rules, and Lee realizes that he was creating an atmosphere to make him nervous on purpose. After some time, he went to the board to write something, thus setting the basic prices of the restaurant. He thinks he's doing this to have extra income, and even if he doesn't receive the inheritance, he will be able to pay the tuition fee. Suddenly, someone calls, and when Lee answers, it was someone from the department office. He asks if it's about his tuition fee, but it's not that. The person on the call explains something that surprises the protagonist with what he heard. He questions if he is now an intern, and the person explains that he will be an intern at Takwang Trading, which everyone knows, from September to December with a monthly salary of 1.9 million won. At the reception of the place, the man comments that he knows he has been working hard and that it would be good to have an internship on his resume when he gets a job. This would be a great opportunity to earn money and develop his skills. But Lee wonders how the restaurant will fare if he does the internship. So he thanks and declines, informing about the restaurant he is already managing. The director asks if he owns a business, and Lee explains that he just took over for 5 years. He then questions what Lee will do after the 5 years, and he says he's still not sure. The director explains that this internship is only for the last semester, and afterward he won't get another, asking then if he shouldn't take advantage of the opportunity when it comes to his future. Lee leaves the school thinking that the restaurant's business hours are from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. He thinks he will probably get off work before 11 p.m. and maybe be able to intern during the day. This was something Lee had to think about a lot. Back at the restaurant, Lee delivers orders to customers while a drunk makes small talk. He thinks the man keeps saying what he wants and not listening to others. The blonde asks what's wrong with his expression and if something happened, handing him a drink. Lee informs that he received an internship offer from a trading company. Everyone then despairs at the possibility of the one-meal restaurant stopping its operation. The cook, however, asks them to calm down because if he accepts, the restaurant will open at the same time, which leaves everyone very relieved. Most could not even imagine living without the restaurant. A man approaches asking about what Lee said and questions if he has ever heard of Kang International. The man introduces himself as Park Chunmin, a founding member of Kang International. Lee is surprised by this, and the blonde is suspicious. Park starts listing several of the requirements to work with what he works with. Bayon asks the protagonist if he understood anything, and Lee responds that more or less. A noise then sounds in the place, and Bayon supposes it must be a customer. A family of 3 people appeared at the restaurant saying they heard they could eat there. They then ask if they can enter. Bayon questions what Lee is doing. Lee panics upon seeing that they are ghosts, which confuses Bayon because he is also one. He states it's different because they are transparent, and Bayon explains that it's because they have just died, explaining that the soul and body are connected 3 days after death and that he was once a half-ghost before. But since they came here, there must be no one to perform their funeral, so Lee asks how he knows this. And Bayon explains that usually people stay at their own funeral for 3 days to eat. But they came straight to the restaurant, and he says that's regrettable. Lee then welcomes them, saying they can order anything, and the woman suggests pork belly because her daughter liked it a lot. The food was delivered, and everyone thanked. A little in the background, Lee asks Bayon if he knows what will happen to these people. Bayon explains that in 3 days, the team will come to take them to the afterlife. Until then, they will be wandering through places where they had memories. Curious about Bayon, Lee questions why he didn't go to the afterlife and if the team didn't look for him. Explaining that it's due to his resentment, he asks Lee if he's ever had any regrets in his life, to which Lee affirms he has plenty. Bayon explains that everyone has done something they regret, but when this feeling turns bitter, they become ghosts. They know they need to resolve this to ascend to heaven. The problem is that they can't remember their resentment. In the end, just like him, they will all be wandering this cold and hungry world without any promise. Lee thinks that, like Yang, all the ghosts there have a resentment. The boy who came on the first day went to heaven after eating his food, so it probably resolved his resentment. But he wonders if he is capable of releasing the resentment of other ghosts. The family thanks for the food and informs that they heard they could pay with that card, which Lee confirms. The man asks if he knows what kind of place the underworld is since it's their first time there. But Lee informs that he also doesn't know because he is a living person. The woman is startled, questioning how a living person can sell food to ghosts, and Lee also doesn't know how to explain. The fact that the cook is human makes the spouses talk among themselves. The husband, a bit embarrassed, decides to ask Lee for a favor. He informs that they have no family or relatives and that everything they had was probably returned to the state. So he asks if Lee could help get that money for the children they sponsored. He promised to pay for their school tuition. The man affirms it's not much, but if Lee can help them, he would be grateful. Lee warns that he doesn't know how he can do this and thinks about the legislative issue of the situation. But he knows lawyer Shin, someone who has studied in that area. Shin said he heard about the whole situation and introduces the manager of GS Finance, questioning if he already knew him. The people in the restaurant panic upon seeing someone who works at the finance company, but he states that he's not there to collect debts, so they can eat at ease. Lee thinks it's true that everyone has debts, but he didn't expect such a strong reaction. Shin addresses the father of that family. He states that he can act as a legal representative for what he asked for, but the cost is 20 million won, something the man didn't have. The JS Finance employee decides to explain better. He states that both the man and his wife are VIP clients who JS Finance is paying attention to. The employee explained that since they donated a certain amount every month to the children, their balance at the company was 60 million won. Shin intervenes, stating that this amount is more than enough to hire him, and the employee explains that this incident will accumulate more money that will be deposited into their accounts. He advises them to save and keep it because even in the underworld, they will need a lot of money. This makes the child's parents emotional and thankful. The man, however, states that it's okay because the value is due to their good actions. Lee understands that good deeds always come back even if they arrive late. Baediang questions Lee what he's doing because it's almost 1 o'clock. He says he's on his way while thinking that it's sad they died but good that they were rewarded. The weather is nice and Lee can't believe he has to work on a day like this, now that he's thrown out the trash. It was just a matter of folding the box and putting it out to finish recycling. But something catches his attention. Terrifying ghosts are seen in the middle of the street. Lee panics at what he saw and screams. Some voices converse while Lee remains unconscious. One man states that he doesn't want to wake him up, while the other says that in moments like this, one should press the acupuncture point. Lee then starts to open his eyes, waking up amid a bunch of acquaintances. Lee, trembling with fear, explains that there were ghosts outside and that they were not opaque, even their bones were visible. The three there look at each other and explain that the ghosts were them. Lee asks what he meant by that because all there didn't even have a scar. And Baeyang explains that what he saw outside is how they really look. Exactly as when they died, but strangely, they look like they did before they died in this restaurant. While thinking that he didn't know their bodies could be so ruined, Lee ends up vomiting. After leaving the bathroom, Lee questions why they are there since there's still a lot of time until 11. Baeyang asks if he believes they have somewhere to go, explaining that he just couldn't see them, but always before the store opens, they waited outside. Lee questions if he has ever been to his room, and Baeyang affirms that besides not wanting to go, he would also need permission. One of the ghosts approaches Lee, performing a correct checkup of his problems, which confuses him. He then introduces himself as Hyun Yan-wook, the best doctor of the 21st century, and that he would have won a Nobel if he had lived a little longer. Hyun explains that the reason he keeps getting surprised is because his heart is weak and teaches him a way to calm down. Lee says he believes he's calming down, but isn't sure. Hyun then starts a session of special medicinal movements, which make Lee feel extremely relaxed. After the session ends, Hyun warns that it's good for the body, but Lee relaxed so much that he didn't hear. Chinese bush clover was the name of the medicine used on Lee. It has many benefits and is good for men. He says he will try it when he gets the chance, and Hyun gets excited, inviting him to go to the market. But Lee had nothing to buy that day and needed to open the restaurant soon. Hyun then starts to depreciate himself, and Lee decides to go to the market with him. At the market, Hyun is enthusiastic while snooping on the products for sale, and Lee thinks he's happy he came. He then looks at a counter searching for the Chinese bush clover that the ghost recommended. But suddenly, a scream in the place catches the attention of both. A woman asks for help, saying there's something wrong with her baby. Lee thinks the woman is a ghost while she laments for her husband. Approaching the scene, Lee realizes it's a case of convulsion. Lee states that he will call 199 while glancing at the woman, but he ends up getting caught staring at her, who stands up questioning if Lee can see her. She stares at him with a psychopathic look and approaches him, saying she knows he can see her. She lunges at him screaming, but contrary to what was thought, she was asking for help for her baby. Lee states he will call 911 first while the woman cries in despair. In the environment, people comment on the man's seizure, questioning what will happen if he dies. Lee tries to contact the man and asks him to hold on until the ambulance arrives. But Hyun warns that at this rate, it will be too late, explaining that the blood will become obstructed and his entire body will become paralyzed. If not treated quickly, he will be unable to move forever. The woman asks if he is a doctor and pleads for his help, but he informs that he cannot possess him as it is too dangerous. They then look at Lee and Hyun states there's another way. Lee asks why they are looking at him, but without time to question, he is put as the doctor of the situation while Hyun instructs. Hyun, after seeing that Lee was not understanding, explains in a more inclusive way and Lee remains apprehensive. Lee says he can't do it because if something goes wrong, the person will be in trouble, so he asks Hyun to do it himself. The doctor, in turn, states that he was only able to touch him due to the energy of the restaurant and asks Lee to trust his instructions. The people around are impressed that Lee is using acupuncture on the unconscious man. The paralysis was decreasing and the man's eyes were beginning to return to normal. The man has a glimpse of his mother, and the ambulance finally arrives. The paramedics ask questions to the man and realize it's a case of seizure, transferring him to the hospital. Hyun explains that they performed first aid, so he will be fine when he gets to the hospital. The woman touches Lee, explaining that her son's body was weak since childhood and she always feared something would happen. But now she says she feels at ease, thanking and ascending to heaven, which leaves Lee surprised and Hyun thoughtful. The customers ask outside if it's time to open yet, and Lee affirms there are 10 minutes left. Those ghosts then wait outside while complaining of hunger. A woman approaches the environment, making the ghosts feel a bad energy. Her feet are wrapped in blood. Finally, the clock strikes 11 o'clock, and Lee goes to the gate, stating that the restaurant is open and everyone can enter. But people start to leave. This makes Lee curious and asking why. He says it's because of that person, slipping away and informing that he will return later. A blood-covered knife drops a drop on the floor, and Lee notices this someone at the beginning of the street. It was definitely a terrifying ghost. He recognizes her as Mrs. Soi, and she, in turn, asks if the cook can see her. Lee affirms that he has been able to see ghosts for a few days, inviting the woman to enter his store. Soi enters the restaurant and sits at a table. Our cook asks for her order, and Soi asks for soju as always. While fetching soju, he thinks that all the ghosts seem to be afraid of the maiden ghosts, wondering why. Moreover, she is always alone even though she is older. Lee calls for Soi, making her turn in his direction, but he ends up giving up on asking something. He thinks there must be a personal reason he should not interfere with. On his first day of internship, Lee thinks it's been a while since he wore a suit. Asking the heavens not to make any mistakes, he sets off for his challenge. A man receives him, saying he doesn't expect much from interns and that if he doesn't know something, he can ask. He shows Lee his chair and asks him to just sit down since someone will give him his work. Lee then sits down, starting his wait, and begins to hear the conversations of his colleagues next to him. Everyone was solving various problems. In his thoughts, Lee asks for someone to give him something to do because this was very strange. The tension is then broken by a colleague who introduces himself as Sang Seob from the training team. The man heard that he graduated in psychology from Seoul Theological University and asked if Lee could tell what he was thinking. Lee doesn't seem to understand what Sang is talking about. Sang continues that as far as he knows, the psychology department is for rich kids who do nothing. He then states he is envious, and that if he can't work, he could just open a counseling center. Lee still doesn't understand what Sang is talking about. Sang drinks coffee and smiles, saying he's joking and asking why he's so serious even though he's so young. Sang welcomes another intern, who was the top student in the International Relations Department, Mr. Choi. He states that he was also a top student and that it's easy to get a job at that company, so it's good to give their best. Sang calls the two to him and says he will start with a simple sorting task. Lee, apprehensive, thinks he's already tired just as he started. He forces himself to believe that this is normal when working, and a senior behind him notices him. The senior asks if he isn't the owner of the one-meal restaurant, and Lee explains that this time he came as an intern. Sang asks if the manager knows Lee, and he explains that Lee owns a restaurant called One Meal. Choi asks about him doing an internship even though he has a restaurant, and the protagonist explains that he became the owner for only 5 years. Sang then says that Lee's story is interesting because he has various distinct skills. The manager praises his suit from before, making Lee happy, while Choi observes from the side. The manager informs that Lee's restaurant has a good reputation among them and says he will go again. He then goes back to focusing on work, but Choi's curious gaze on Lee now starts to become aggressive. Lee presents a list of stock logistics and conditions for the warehouse, along with a copy of the import and export declaration. A woman reads, responding that's pretty cool and the data are detailed. She congratulates Lee on the work and praises him. Sang asks if he can go back now that he has nothing else to do. And the woman affirms that he finished the work and it's time to leave, saying that he can go home and that she will see him tomorrow. However, the fact that Lee has already left makes her curious. Sang says that in his time as an intern, he wouldn't even dream of leaving on time. The manager warns that they can't force someone to do all the work, and when Sang was about to complain about his past experiences, she cuts him off, stating that she's a little worried because Kang's story is quite unique, but he is diligent and has good sense for his first job. Lee thinks it was good to have organized the things that Mr. Chun warned him about earlier. It really helped him. Suddenly, someone calls for Donghae, asking if he made a copy of the data, reminding him that he asked to do it in the morning, and Donghae says he will do it soon. Lee thinks that looking at Donghae at first, he was anxious because he was a standout student, but he is very slow. Despite trying to do his best, he makes many mistakes. The old man arrives at a restaurant and explains to Lee that this is the place where his favorite dried soup is sold. At the location, there was a photo with the former president and signatures of idols and actors everywhere. This should be a sign the place of quality. Lee says he can hardly wait for the food, and turns to the owner, noticing that she is in a terrible state and wondering why she hasn't become a ghost yet. The waiter serves them rudely, and the old man orders 5 ox blood hangover soups. While serving, he explains that water and additional side dishes are self-service. Everyone then starts eating. Lee thinks it doesn't taste bad, but it's not so good to have a line wanting to eat this. The old man says it usually doesn't taste like that, and the manager agrees, saying it used to be better. The old man apologizes because this used to be a good restaurant, and Lee says he doesn't mind because he eats everything. Now that everyone is finished, they decide to leave. But before leaving, Lee stops for a moment and pays attention to the owner, who is very ill. A customer questions if this is really a good restaurant, and another informs that the restaurant owner was an elderly lady, and since she passed away, the quality has only worsened. Back at the restaurant, Ba states that he knows the lady well. She was a friend of the owner of the place where he worked, and her culinary skills were incredible. Ba asks how the store is currently, and Lee informs that although there are many people, the taste is simple. While commenting on the preparation method of the hangover soup, Ba doesn't understand why people buy the instant one. Lee asks if the recipe wasn't passed on to the son because people started leaving that restaurant, which makes Ba wonder. Someone then appears at the door, entering the restaurant and asking with a smile if he is the first customer of the day. Lee welcomes Mr. Park and says that thanks to him, he is doing well at the company. Park, in turn, asks Lee not to worry. As a thank you, Lee says he will make anything he wants to eat. Park then asks for a bowl of hot rice with red pepper paste soup. Lee decides to look in the notebook but realizes that recipe is not there. Ba asks what Lee's expression is about, and Lee explains that the recipe is not in the notebook and he can't cook anything that's not there. Ba says it's easy and decides to teach him how to make the red pepper soybean paste. A step-by-step of the dish is then given, and after finishing, Lee serves his customer. Park puts the food on his plate and prepares to take his first bite. Upon eating, he comments that even if he had the chance, there's nothing to add to this bowl, thanking the chef and praising him for the good dish he made. Ba asks why Lee doesn't take this opportunity to learn to cook with him, and Lee then asks to be taught how to make the simple garlic pickles, but Ba denies it desperately. He explains that if garlic is cooked, they will come, and Lee asks what he means by they. But he remembers the maiden ghosts. Lee asks why he's afraid since he's also a ghost, and Ba explains that he will only know when he becomes one. Lee comments that he's also afraid of Mr. Kang and calls him a coward. Embarrassed, Ba says it's because of the debt, and it's not normal for a dead ghost to earn money. He explains that he's lucky to work there and earn money, but if the debt isn't paid and the negative balance continues, GS finance people will catch them. If caught, one must present the documents at the bank counter and be examined for the extension of the term, and the line is long and slow. If you fail the exam, you are extinguished. It is explained that in this world, death and extinction seem the same but are quite different. This is because death is not the end, but a true new beginning. However, extinction is a complete disappearance of body and soul. Given this, Lee understands that his friend must solve this problem as soon as possible to avoid the same fate. However, the blonde warns that ghosts so know what resentment is, which is why he gets so stressed. Since he cannot help, the hero apologizes, but the blonde is resigned as he didn't share this story to gain sympathy. After this intense confession, the boy decides to leave for a while as it's already late, and the protagonist asks where he's going but gets no response. Inevitably, the store hasn't had many customers since Park Chung-min arrived, which raises concerns about whether things will continue to go well. Sometime after this questioning, the hero realizes that, in fact, nothing is going well. This is because, without an assistant, all the work fell into his hands, and he was no longer able to handle everything. With this, he apologizes to the boy in his mind and asks him to come back soon. At the right moment, the blonde finally appears with another person in the area and questions why there are so many customers. The boy then asks where his assistant has been, as he was already thinking he would die from so much serving and cooking. Shifting focus, the boy receives a new customer who claims not to need help, just wanting to eat well. From afar, the woman observes the efficiency in the restaurant's work and comments that although the cook is younger than her son, he is already very skilled. Without further delay, Lee apologizes for the delay, and the lady doesn't mind it but asks about the food. Thus, the hero informs her that everything is ready and asks if the customer needs anything else to ease her concerns. In this case, to improve the impression she had earlier, the woman feels a bit embarrassed and asks for a gunji hangover soup. Looking at his partner, Lee understands that this will take a long time. However, the blonde reassures him that there's no need to worry. He quickly hands over a business card to go buy a bowl at his store, and amazingly, the protagonist pulls a VIP card from JS Finances out of his pocket. However, since it's an underworld card, they can't use it in physical stores, so they need to use conventional money. Despite this, the hero is still afraid that his food might disappoint her by not tasting the same as before. However, Ba's opinion is the opposite. This is precisely why the woman must eat, as she wants to see for herself how bad it is. After finally finding the soup, Lee observes it and realizes that he's getting nervous for no reason. Anyway, the blonde asks how the store was when the boy went there, and it's said that there is another customer, but indifferent and not similar to the lady's son. While eating the soup, the lady thinks that the taste is doomed to disappear. However, for her, it's still quite painful to eat it. Thinking that a drink would be nice, the hero asks if the customer would like something to go with it. In this case, the lady asks for alcohol, specifically soju and 2 beers, along with some glasses to serve. Grabbing the bottle, the customer excitedly mentions that she's made soju and beer many times, even though it's been a while, which makes her worried about the result. She states that even though it may seem like it's being shaken randomly, it's all a matter of technique. Still, despite stirring gently with her fingers, some boldness must also be applied, which in the end produces an impressive result. The first glass is given to the young chef, who thanks her while barely being able to wait to try it. Taking the first sip, he shouts with resounding enthusiasm because it's really super smooth, making the lady happy that her skills are still alive. Additionally, the portions are perfectly made because the lady has her own recipe. Given this, she asks if the remaining customers also want a glass, which obviously no one refuses. In this case, she warms up her shoulders and announces that she will show her true skills. Later, in a more personal conversation, she explains that her husband died when she was 25 years old. They had a son, but it was hard to ask for help from relatives because of money, so she was trying to do something with the soup recipe. It is said that nothing in life is easy, and that she also fought with other restaurant owners because she was very popular. In her old time, she also cried a lot in secret, and thus made that hangover soup with dedication. The lady stayed up all night because it was hard to remain in a normal state. However, one day that brat made her soup, which was her reason for studying and surviving, turn into something extremely disgusting. After hearing the story, Lee remembers that the hangover soup restaurant started small but grew a lot with the dedication of sweat and tears. Inevitably, the boy in charge of managing it really messed everything up, so the lady asks if the young chef can do her a favor. Touched by the story, Lee agrees, but that lady asks the hero to ruin the business of her restaurant. This request comes very unexpectedly, leaving Lee confused since it is a restaurant to which the woman dedicated her entire life. In this case, she explains that although she is grateful that the restaurant allowed her son to study and get married, she doesn't want to disappoint the customers. That said, Ba questions how they will ruin it because even though the taste has changed a lot, there are still customers who come because of the rumors. Thus, the lady responds that it's simple and explains that if there's a more delicious hangover soup, customers will prefer that one. So she decides to teach the young cook her recipe with the same taste she used to make in her younger days. In another region, a man desperately asks if the hero will really sell the hangover soup, which is confirmed. The manager knows the boy has skills because he has already tasted his food. However, since he's working at the company, he believes it will be difficult to handle. Then the protagonist explains that he decided to sell only on weekends, preparing about 60 portions per day. The manager in turn believes that to sell that much, something must be planned, but he's still curious about what to believe. In this case, he asks if he can make a reservation, and after being told yes, he asks for a table for 3 people. With everything set, what's left is to order blood sausage and Napa cabbage from Shin Suyang. Also, a stock of alcohol is necessary because the customers will want it. It was said that the beef bone needs to be boiled for about 12 hours. With that, if they start cooking on Friday, it might work out. Suddenly, a veteran calls the hero for the 3rd time, who isn't paying attention because he's lost in thought. He metaphorically questions where the hero sold his soul, and instead asks if he intends to become a full-time employee. This question arises suddenly because Lee has only been there for a week. Then the veteran comments that he thought the same at first because it involves someone from psychology. However, he says that since the boy is good at the job, that's enough, which surprises Lee, who thought Dongyu would receive the offer first. But it's said that he is working more because interns who don't seem capable tend to be trained more so they can learn the methods. Continuing, the veteran explains that unlike a newcomer, the hero already knows the job well and is good at it, which makes him a priority over the other intern. Given this, Lee understands that things in this company are quite straightforward, and the soul of a former employee praises the veteran's ability to read people. Interrupting the conversation, he says that if the chef becomes a full-time employee, they won't have a place to eat. However, it's a fact that if he accepts the offer, he could earn money more stably and might not need to work at the restaurant again. But the ghosts that come to the restaurant will be completely abandoned. Soon the hero remembers what the lawyer said about this restaurant being the border between the underworld and the real world. A true restaurant of the afterlife and the only place where ghosts wandering the world can fill their bellies. Given this, the veteran questions whether the restaurant is really that important but manages to understand the boy's motivations. Without delay, he asks if Donne is busy and the boy promptly responds that he is not because he just finished the report sent to Manager Park. In this case, it's said that Lee can continue with what he's doing while he and the other intern will go to a certain place together. Thus, the hero remembers that interns who don't seem capable tend to be trained to work. And in light of the veteran's treatment of the boy, he hopes everything goes well in his life because he can see the hard work in his actions. Later at the restaurant, the recipe for the hangover soup is passed on to the young cook. The soup before him is the popular grandma's beef blood hangover soup, very different from the one her son makes. Initially, the smell already seems delicious, but when tasted, the flavor surprises even more with a strong and spicy taste. With this, the boy comments that although it's a hangover soup, it brings a taste that makes you want to drink alcohol. Then the lady explains that the soup serves multiple purposes to feel better while continuing to drink, which Lee understands and already prepares an appetizer. With the soup in hand, the first customer starts to eat, who happens to be the company manager. Alongside him, Manager Park from the trade team and Yu from commercial marketing are also very impressed with the quality of the restaurant. However, they still don't understand why there aren't many customers in the restaurant. So Lee explains that today is the first day selling the hangover soup, which explains the lack of customers. In this case, Park asks if the hero didn't invite senior manager Jung, and it's said that for now, Lee would like to serve only the regular managers. Anyway, he knows that this hangover soup isn't made to make money and is selling it because they want to ruin Ms. Oh Soon-young's restaurant. With this, rumors won't spread if he sells it to the company. However, if word of mouth spreads to real customers, it will only be a matter of time. Returning to his content expression, Lee explains that since the restaurant is a space separate from the company, he thought it would be better if only people who knew about it came. In this case, one of the workers agrees, saying that it would indeed be uncomfortable to go to a place with many people from the company. Thus, Soon-young, after witnessing the entire scene, praises the hero and also his bosses. And soon the managers leave, happy with the meal and willing to return in the near future. Outside the restaurant, a boy talks to another, informing him that the restaurant next door sells beef blood hangover soup. He is willing to try it, but the other explains that if they walk a little further, they can access a more traditional restaurant. With this, they enter the lady's shop and order 2 hangover soups, being greeted by her son. The food quickly arrives, but the moment the boys taste it, they realize they made a big mistake. Thus, they leave the restaurant without even finishing the food, complaining about the taste, realizing that the place's fame no longer lives up to the quality. In this case, they believe they should have gone to the other place earlier, and a man observes all this. Later, the lady's son asks what the boss is doing outside because his wife is calling him. He quickly says it's nothing while crushing the newspaper, but with a serious expression, he comments that it seems there are flies buzzing nearby. Later at the company, a man comments that he heard everything from Manager Lee's mouth and is questioned about what he heard. In this case, the man is upset for not being informed about the new dish at the boys' restaurant. However, the hero doesn't think it's right to talk about this at work. The chief manager in turn says he also wants to eat, and the boy explains that they only sell 60 portions a day. Anyway, it's possible to reserve a table now because there are still 8 bowls left for Sunday, so the senior decides to reserve 5. Additionally, a girl reserves for 3 people, and in the end, the boy's veteran is left without a spot. He asks if he can at least get 1 bowl, but it's said that he sells limited portions and asks if there's interest in reserving for next week. With this, the senior asks if Sang Seop wants to take his reservation for 40 rias, but the boy isn't willing to pay that much for it. However, others are willing to pay even more, reaching the mark of 60 rias for the reservation, which leaves the veteran quite confused. In this case, reservations for the next week already begin because there aren't many places that make good hangover soup, and the other intern observes everything. While all that commotion about the restaurant is happening, the boy decides to copy the materials for the next meeting. Thus, Sang Seop thanks him but doesn't miss the opportunity to criticize the boy to do it right, and soon continues talking about the reservation. Given this, the protagonist believes he should also copy the data now and thinks it's better to leave these parallel matters for later. Without delay, the hero follows Donghae and asks if they can do it together because it's too much work to do alone. However, the boy refuses because Lee doesn't even take the internship seriously, so he starts venting his frustrations about him. Irritated, he continues by saying that thanks to this restaurant, the manager has taken an interest in the boy, but he should be careful. This is because their skills will be revealed in the final evaluation. After this disagreement, Lee knows that Donghae is right because he has no intention of becoming a regular employee. At the moment, he is able to work because of Chung Man's help, which may have offended not only the intern but also everyone else. Given this, the soul of the former employee says there's nothing wrong with being smart, but this still leaves Lee uncomfortable. Later at the restaurant, someone mentions they made a reservation for 2 portions of hangover soup. Lee promptly attends to the customers and asks them to sit while he serves others with a fresh kimchi refill. Upon tasting it, the company employees realize that the flavor is incredible, and one of them, despite usually not liking beef blood, still finds it great. Given this, a boy asks if this hangover soup doesn't taste similar to the one from the other restaurant, but his colleague believes this one is much better. In the end, Lee comments to the lady who owns the recipe that everything seems to be going as planned. Thus, Soon-young believes that at this rate, it's only a matter of time before her son's business goes bankrupt. At the lady's restaurant, the cook's wife mentions that the number of customers has decreased recently. Then he explains that nowadays people don't like beef blood much. Suddenly, to his luck, customers arrive, so he welcomes them and asks how many people will eat. Of the two customers who arrived, a blonde one asks for a reservation for two, but his friend explains that this is not the right place. Soon the blonde realizes it's better to go to the other restaurant and apologizes, while trying to smooth things over by saying he'll return to eat at this restaurant too. In light of this, the cook's wife asks if there's a restaurant nearby that serves hangover soup, and it turns out there really is. In this case, the man rushes out, and his wife asks where he's going. Already very irritated, the cook asks how long they will keep watching competitors take their customers. Back at the hero's restaurant, he prepares the soup with the help of the recipe's creator herself. Meanwhile, that man wants to see up close how well the competitor knows how to make hangover soup. During the weekdays, the protagonist goes to work at 9 a.m. and leaves at 6 p.m. After work, he opens the restaurant for the ghosts from 11 p.m. until 1 a.m. On weekends, he makes hangover soup and sells it to living people alongside Ms. Soon Young. Faced with the soup, the hero states that he has been working for a long time but is already discouraged by the tough times he's witnessing. The blonde, in turn, thinks it's better to bring in another helper, but Lee comments that the problem is on weekends, when he has to work alone. In this case, he's considering hiring someone living for the weekend, even if it's for a short period. Given this, Bud explains that if someone spends too much time among ghosts, they eventually become one of them. It's said that this type of person isn't just a simple customer who comes to eat and leaves. Thus, by working, the employee will absorb the negative energy of the place. And inevitably, they will also be able to see the ghosts outside the restaurant. In the end, even someone like the hero who works with ghosts still gets surprised. For a normal person, this will definitely be a big shock. So in the end, the only thing that can work in this shop is Lee's work together with his colleague who helps by working part-time. Having finished eating, one of the big names at the company where Lee works asks him for some soju, which is promptly prepared. Given this, the lady helps the protagonist choose the best brand of drink and suggests that the one with the clear packaging seems to be the one that will please him. Unexpectedly, even without specifying which one he wanted, the boy made the right choice because the man really likes that drink. The couple from the meat restaurant, on the other hand, likes fish cake as a side dish, so the hero quickly brings that for them. Additionally, the convenience store owner loves to sprinkle a little more black pepper on his food, thus Lee also made sure to do that. Given all this passed down knowledge, Soon-young proves to be increasingly impressive because she still remembers all the customers' tastes. Even though she is no longer alive, her hangover soup restaurant was truly her life. Later, someone arrives at the restaurant and asks if the cook still has beef blood hangover soup, but they are told that a reservation is necessary. Upon hearing this, the lady becomes very sad and asks what Ha Han-soo is doing there. It becomes clear that the man now standing before them is the lady's son, who has come along with his wife. So the hero asks the customers to sit down and says he will prepare their order because fortunately, there are still 2 bowls left for the day. Very happy for this moment, the protagonist knew this day would come, and for that reason, he had already prepared some extra bowls. During the preparation, Soon-young advises him to add a little more sugar to her son's hangover soup bowl. The hero questions if it won't be too sweet, but the lady explains that she raised the boy and knows all his tastes. Without further delay, the ordered beef blood hangover soup dish arrives along with the side dishes for the 2 customers. The first to taste it is the cook's wife, and as soon as she does, she realizes this is not an ordinary soup. Soon, Ha Han-soo also takes a bite to see for himself, but his reaction is even stronger than his wife's. The ghostly cook lady becomes worried, and the man quickly cleans out the bowl, having eaten everything. As he finishes his meal, he asks if the chef happens to know his mother. With this, the hero turns to look at the ghostly lady while trying to disguise the fact that he knows her. In any case, Ha Han-soo begins to tell the story of his mother, who was the owner of the famous hangover soup restaurant who passed away a few years ago. While listening, Lee offers the boy a drink and explains that he already knows her. For this reason, he believes it would be better if they drink and talk first before continuing the conversation. Seeing the technique of pouring drinks into the glasses, Ha Han-soo understands that the boy must really know his mother. In response, Lee explains that he learned things like the beef blood hangover soup and the stone mortar bowl from her. Given this, the wife interrupts, questioning whether the boy has any conscience because the woman's restaurant is still active, selling the same dish on the menu. However, Lee simply asks if he did something wrong, which infuriates the woman, as it is the recipe of her esteemed matriarch. She claims that there is already an original hangover soup in this neighborhood with the same recipe, but the hero questions whether it's truly the same when sold by him. This only serves to make the woman even more upset, but wisely, her husband calms her down and explains that the cook is not wrong. However, because he has done this, he knows it is not easy to maintain this routine every day. It's said that Ha Han-soo would wake up every morning to check the broth container while chopping a mountain of ingredients. While boiling the beef blood on his own, it would already be time to open the shop, and soon after, it would be time to restock, doing this every day. Inevitably, Lee sympathizes with this because he only follows this routine on weekends, and even so, he's already exhausted from the fatigue. However, one question was more pertinent than physical exhaustion, leading the hero to ask about the man's mother. He recalls that Mrs. Soon-young also made the broth by herself and never bought or used instant broth, having gone through this for nearly 50 years. Furthermore, he mentions that when he visited the shop before, there was a phrase hanging at the entrance. It said that delicious hangover soup is made with good ingredients and sincerity. But because of something as trivial as exhaustion, Ha Han-soo broke a promise he had kept all his life with his mother. To give his version of the story, the man comments that he had always been by the side of hangover soup. Whenever his mother didn't open the shop, even for a day, she would apologize to the customers who were waiting, and she never even spent a weekend with him. So finally, the man understands that he has always done this and made mistakes because he was disappointed. Given this, both the spirit of his mother and his wife go to console the boy. And at that moment, the hero reveals that he actually started selling the hangover soup to ruin the woman's children's shop. This revelation obviously shocks both of them, so Lee explains that since they disappointed the customers, he did it out of respect for Mrs. Oh. He then asks about the taste of the soup, and the hair cook comments that it is delicious. In this case, the protagonist asks Ha Han-soo if he believes this place can serve a better hangover soup than the other restaurant. With that, the man begins to think, and in his mind goes back a few years into the past. He remembers the day when a favor was asked of him. His mother was able to raise him and care for him without feeling ashamed thanks to the hangover soup. Thus, her last request was for her son to continue sharing the taste that she had lived her whole life for with other people. Remembering his past, Ha Han-soo returns to his normal self, and as he finishes drinking a shot and places the glass on the table, with a smile, he says that Lee won't be able to ruin them because his restaurant will soon be back. With everyone happy about how this situation unfolded, the lady's relatives leave while thanking them for the meal. And after saying goodbye to everyone, the lady herself asks for permission to speak with Chef Lee. Apparently, there's something she wants to do, so the hero explains that she can go after her son. Lee asks that if the lady is going to leave, she should visit him before departing, which isn't initially understood but will inevitably happen at the right time. With that, the two bid farewell and a peripheral view of the city. The boy hopes everything will go well. A few days later, the shop and restaurant were thoroughly cleaned and the day's lunch was already prepared. However, the next task was to clean this immense pile of dishes left at the end of each day. The boy still has to prepare for dinner, but that means he needs to finish washing the dishes while preparing the food. But thinking back, it was said that if Ba's name was called 3 times, he would immediately come to assist in a critical situation. In this case, the hero believes he should use it and quickly proceeds with a ritual calling the boy 3 times. Incredibly, he actually appears, manifesting from the shadows in front of the cook. However, at the moment he arrives, a strong headache and mental confusion are noticed, caused by the summoning. Ba is quite irritated for being called, as he taught the technique out of courtesy and didn't believe it would actually be used. Promptly, he warns that if the boy isn't busy, he'll leave, but Lee informs him that the matter is urgent and asks if his colleague has another commitment. In this case, the blonde explained that he was just watching the hangover soup restaurant. Apparently, the couple was very anxious, indicating that they want to show the cook the original taste of the hangover soup. Hearing this, the hero believes that everything is going according to plan and that Mrs. O will be pleased. Changing the subject, the protagonist comments that his colleague should also ascend and asks if he remembered anything, regardless of its significance. However, the assistant didn't remember anything and, in response, asked if the reason for his summoning was just for that. Then Lee denied it and said that if there's a place his companion wants to go, they should go together. But before that, he asked Ba to help him by washing some of the dishes for him. Rolling up his sleeves, the blonde says he'll help but asks if there aren't other ghosts to assist, to which the answer is that there aren't. In this case, the blonde begins to work, and returning to the subject of ascension, Lee explains that he was serious about going to the place where Ba wishes to go. With that, the boy believes they should buy a knife first and mentions that there's a good shop in the Punmo market. After getting the new knife, the hero questions why his colleague is staring at it so intently. Then the blonde explains that it's been years since he last touched his own knife, which is a great feeling, but Lee thinks that's very sad. Without wasting time, Ba shows curiosity to see what the cook bought for himself. This is because he didn't show it even when asked, which obviously leaves the boy embarrassed. In this case, the hero recalls that his colleague was watching the hangover soup, and to relieve this pressure, he tries to send him back. Soon, he explains that they no longer sell hangover soup, and while dismissing his helper, the item he bought remains hidden in his pocket. Later, the protagonist continues the dinner preparations, and after chopping many ingredients, they are tossed into the frying pan. Finally, they are ready on magnificent plates, but it's still uncertain if that's enough. In this case, Lee calls out for Kim So-lee 3 times to summon her, but after calling several times, she doesn't appear. So the boy believes it's as expected since not all ghosts come after being called 3 times. However, unexpectedly, Kim, although a bit late, actually appears in the restaurant, but she's much more terrifying than usual and also much more irritated due to the summoning. Upon seeing the girl's spirit, our hero throws himself back in fear, which only makes her more upset as this is the reaction of her summoner. While trembling with fear, Lee thinks that anyone would be surprised to witness this and says he'd like to serve her some food. In response, the girl asks if she looks like a ghost who's crazy about food, and realizing he offended her, Lee quickly says he'll just clean up what he prepared. However, it was obvious she was just being difficult, and upon hearing this, she replied that she didn't mind eating since his apologies were sincere. In this case, the boy says he'll hurry to prepare something, but the ghost abruptly refuses. She explains that as a customer, she needs to arrive at the designated place at the designated time, and with that leaves, saying she'll return at 11 o'clock. Later, the 11 o'clock hour finally arrives, and the hero hands her a glass of drink. Tasting it, the girl realizes that the mixture of soju and beer isn't bad, and Lee smiles, saying he knew it would suit her taste. However, the girl explains that this is far from the best drink she's ever had, so curious, the protagonist asks what kind of drink that is. But mysteriously, Kim only says that the cook will have the chance to try it one day. This only makes the hero more curious, but he realizes he's getting anxious for no reason. Because he's not paying attention, he drops something on the floor, and after being alerted, he quickly picks it up. However, the girl asks why he's so distracted. In this case, Lee brings to the table the item he bought and explains that it's a gift for Kim So-hee to make up for his past mistakes. A bit embarrassed, the boy explains that it's not very expensive, but the girl thinks it's a nice gesture to apologize with a token. When she opens it, she realizes it's a norage, and Lee explains why he thought it would look good on her. Looking more closely, Kim comments that unexpectedly, it's the first time in 400 years she's received something from someone. Lee asks if that means it's the first time she's received a gift since her death. However, the girl explains that she's had a few since becoming a ghost, but they were from shamans who wanted to gain power through her. She didn't know how they knew about her, but she generally helped those who needed help and refused others for certain reasons. In any case, she explains that it's been a long time since she felt like she was communicating with people the way she is now. Having spent so much time alone, even though she's a ghost and a powerful warrior strong enough to be called upon by shamans, she's endured alone for 400 years, raising the question of what resentment she harbors that has kept her here for so long. After eating, the girl thanks him for the food and suddenly prepares to leave. To explain herself, she recalls that if she stays too long, other ghosts won't be able to come to the restaurant. However, Lee comments that he believes others will inevitably continue to come anyway. So with a smile, he asks Kim to come whenever she can, both during the day and at night. The girl leaves and observes this statement without showing any reaction. So the hero thinks he's being too forward. But before leaving, the girl accepts the offer and with a slight smile, assures him that she'll come whenever she's free. Later, in the restaurant, the group of girls from before comments on the lingering energy of the last customer, which is still present in the place after she left. They chat among themselves in a rather relaxed manner, but the hero decides to give his opinion, saying that she's not so scary to talk to. Despite this, they inform him that she's instinctively a leader, and it's like a dog can't pass in front of a lion, even if it's in a cage. In the end, not all ghosts are the same, and many of them have problems in various areas. Suddenly, another customer arrives, and the protagonist greets him in the same gentle manner as always. However, this customer wasn't normal, as he fell to his knees on the floor, making noise and knocking over a chair. He complains about the chair he tripped over, and the protagonist asks if he's okay. The man, on the other hand, recovers from the fall and feels a bit embarrassed by the situation he's in. Without a shred of shame, he harasses one of the girls in the group and offers to buy her a drink. When he asks if the girl is playing hard to get, she becomes very irritated, already considering resorting to physical violence. Along with this strange customer, Ducci also arrived, and since he was with the man, he apologized for the commotion caused. Apparently, this man hasn't been dead for very long because he's still unaware of his condition, so the employee from JS Finances thought it would be a good idea to bring him to the restaurant. It's said that this man is a highly valuable customer who took out many loans with them, which forces them to tolerate him. However, just as the protagonist was about to say something, a physical conflict between the two ghosts really began. Breaking a bottle over the boy, the woman sarcastically said she was doing it to celebrate his first day and asked if he felt grateful. In response to this insult, the customer lunged at the woman to attack her, approaching furiously. However, before the boy could do anything too reckless, the protagonist intervened and asked his customer to calm down. Meanwhile, the JS Finances employee tried to calm the girl down, who, despite not starting the fight, was still provoking. After that, Ducci approached his customer and with a smile asked the chef for a glass of water to give to the boy. This only made the boy angrier, as he was being restrained by a random person, and he angrily asked if he knew who he was. In response, the JS Finances employee leaned on the chair and with a clipboard in hand said he knew him very well. This troublesome boy is Go Young-woo, the third son of the Hoyam Group, a 33-year-old man and an excellent bank customer. Initially, the boy starts boasting, but it's then revealed that his balance is -1.475 billion. Obviously, Go Young-woo questions this absurd amount, but he's told that this is his story at the bank, and the Underworld bank works differently. Hearing this, the customers are shocked by the debt amount and wonder if the boy is a serial killer to be in such a bad state. After the water arrives, an indignant Go Young asserts that he won't be fooled by a third sector financial bank he's never heard of. Ducci, in turn, asks the boy to calm down and drink the water so he can sign the document in his hands. However, believing it to be a scam, the boy throws everything in the air and questions how a low-quality bank dares to try to deceive him. The JS Finance's employee, however, simply bows his head and asks the boy to take the document. But Go Young explains that he knows it's a scam because he also used to subdue people by force. With this, he believes the man in front of him isn't a banker, but rather a gangster. Nevertheless, Du Choi, being on duty for his job, is beginning to lose patience with his customer. When he asks the boy to take the document, he reluctantly accepts, though he complains that the man in front of him could do it himself. Witnessing this situation, Lee comments that he's never seen Mr. Ducci so angry, and when he asked about the documents, he's informed that they are loan certificates. However, even if it's not a document signed by a millionaire debtor, the hero believes that Ducci is right to be angry given the boy's attitude. With this in mind, recalling the man's behavior and the fact that he was drunk when he died, the girl asks if the chef hasn't realized it yet. And with a laugh, she explains that the guy still doesn't know he's dead and is just discovering it now. To clarify, the JS Finance's employee asks the boy to look at the contents of the loan certificate for liability due to death while driving intoxicated. Then he informs him that the boy may not remember, but he drove after drinking and when he changed lanes collided with a car coming from the opposite direction. As a result, both the other driver and he died, which means the boy has to pay the settlement amount to the other party. Upon hearing this, the man comments that he's also dead and asks what this settlement means. To illustrate, Ducci makes an analogy that the amount of water in the body represents the lifespan of a person. And the time one lives on Earth as a human is more or less like this small pinch of salt on your finger, with the rest of the water becoming the expenditure in the afterlife. The boy, in turn, asks what this has to do with money, and in this case, it's explained that because he killed someone who wasn't supposed to die, the remaining time of that person in this world is compensated with money, and since the man's outstanding debt is $14 billion, he will pay according to the law of the underworld. Hearing this, the boy is shocked, saying it was an accident and that he didn't intend to kill anyone. However, that is a sin already committed regardless of personal intention, and unlike the laws of the living world, apologies won't work. In this case, the JS Finance's employee asks if the troublemaker feels more secure now and comments that he did something irreversible by involving an innocent person in his crime, so he will have to pay the appropriate price using the currency of this world. After verifying the documents, the next step is to place his thumb on the signature line beside his name to be guided on the next stage. And the next stage is the 3-day funeral. And when it's over, the JS immigration officer will come and guide the boy to the afterlife. With this, even more distressed, Go Young asks what happens after that, already beginning to tremble. It's then explained that the sin the boy committed with his mouth and money is a physical sin committed on his own accord. Thus, the tears shed by all those sinners will suffocate his breath, and the pain they receive will sever his limbs. At this moment, Go Young experiences a despair he has never felt before, but he had already signed the documents. With that, extending his hand, Du Choi thanks him while the boy still tries to deny his reality. In response, the JS employee asks if the boy thinks it's appropriate for the guests to be present without the host. So without further delay, he calls Go Young to go straight to the funeral home. Later, outside the restaurant, the protagonist closes the establishment's gate to leave. After some time, he stands up and from a distance, Ba shouts asking it's already closed. In this case, our hero confirms it is and comments that he did a good job even without his helper, which is interpreted as a slightly sarcastic remark. Hearing this, the spirit of Mrs. Soon Young appears, striking up a conversation and is promptly greeted by the two. She explains that she was sitting next to her precious son, and he held the ladle with confidence, trying his best to cook just like he used to. With a smile, she then says she hopes the chef can come to her restaurant to eat a bowl of soup and evaluate it. The protagonist comments that it seems the lady's anger has been relieved. However, Ba disagrees, saying it's only been a few days, and in his opinion, that cook will probably give up very soon. Mrs. Soon Young doesn't take this comment positively. The blonde questions if just that action was enough to make her stay by her son's side. Lee, on the other hand, unexpectedly agrees with the lady, which leaves the assistant somewhat confused. To explain, he states that the couple's eyes definitely conveyed a real determination, as if they were saying they knew they were doing something wrong and needed someone to scold them. Eyes that were begging for someone to tell them there is still salvation. That's what Lee felt when he looked directly into his eyes. With that, the hero locks the gate to his restaurant and is thanked by the cook's spirit. In such a case, Lee doesn't believe he did anything grand because he also believes this wholeheartedly. Finally, with the restaurant matter brought up, the boy has the idea for all of them to go together the next day for a meal. As he heads towards the restaurant, Lee passes by a pair of friends discussing the food of the place. One of them is happy that his meal was much better than the first time they ate there, so they realize they just had bad luck the first time. Other people also talk about how the quality of the place has unexpectedly improved and begin to think that the young chef has returned to his roots. Even though he hasn't tried it yet, our hero already believes the answer is clear, but the lady thinks he'll only know once he tries it. Outside the restaurant, a man comes out carrying his drunk friend, who questions why he gets even more drunk when trying to cure his hangover. He replies that it's because he's happy since the original taste is back, which deserves a celebration to drink until he's tired. His friend agrees and praises the chef for the food, which is getting better and better. With a much friendlier demeanor than before, the chef thanks them kindly and says that from now on, they will do their best to preserve the taste of his mother's food. Hearing this, the cook recalls memories of his past with his mother. While they ate together, she would always tell him to eat slowly despite his hunger, so he wouldn't choke. A bit embarrassed for always saying the same thing, Soon-young wondered if she should do something different to vary her son's menu. However, that boy quickly refused the suggestion and continued eating normally. That's because, with a smile, he said that his mother's hangover soup was the most delicious in the world, something that has happened again in the present. After bidding farewell to those customers, the cook notices Lee near the restaurant and shouts a greeting. Promptly, our hero responds, asking how the chef has been, and he explains that he's doing well thanks to the boy. With that, he invites the boy to come and eat a dish at his restaurant, and with a smile, Lee accepts, asking for a bowl of hot hangover soup. Realizing that the order is for the classic beef blood hangover soup, the cook invites the protagonist inside. He immediately begins the preparations with his wife, working with extreme focus just as they had been doing before. This makes Lee happy that everything is going well, and Mrs. O thanks the cook. In response, he reciprocates, thanking her even more for having learned a precious technique for free thanks to her. With much of her resentment having dissipated, the woman begins to ascend to the heavens while crying and expressing her gratitude. She explains that her son's aging and already has many wrinkles, so she can't help but worry. In this case, our hero assures her that he will frequently check on her son's shop, and if the taste isn't right, he will scold him again. For this reason, he asks Soon-young to trust him with this responsibility so she can finally let go of her resentment. Having witnessed all the good that the boy has done in his life, the woman stops crying and accepts the offer. With that, Soon-young leaves the legacy of her life for Lee to oversee, and with a clear conscience, she finally departs for the afterlife. Just as the lady is freed, a check falls to the ground right in front of the boy. It's a check for 37,000 Rias from GS Finances, but when he thinks about it, it still seems small compared to the legacy of that woman. Nevertheless, Lee looks up at the sky and thanks her for everything, saying he will use the money with great gratitude. Interrupting this farewell moment, the cook appears at the door and asks if the boy isn't coming in to eat. With everything resolved, he finally goes in to enjoy his hangover soup. Inside the restaurant, both the service and the atmosphere were truly pleasant, not to mention that the taste of the food had really returned to what it was before. Later, back at his job, the protagonist submits a report but notices some formatting errors. Fortunately, the person who received it didn't notice the problem and simply asked if there were any other questions. Relieved that he got away with it, he said there weren't any and quickly left. However, there was something he wanted to ask his superior because the office was very different from usual. At that moment, everyone was exercising, even the most sedentary ones, making the office resemble a gym. This situation impacts Lee even more than the first time he saw a ghost. While walking down the corridor, the hero encounters manager Lee and the two greet each other. Promptly, the manager asks to make a reservation for the weekend, but the boy explains that the dish has been removed from the menu. While jumping rope, the manager regrets this decision, and Lee explains that if he wants to eat the soup, he should go to the original restaurant. In this case, the manager isn't upset and decides to go to the other restaurant, trusting the cook's advice. As the manager walks through the area, Lee begins to think that being around ghosts must have started to make him hallucinate. At that moment, the other intern appears and tells the boy to move out of his way, so the hero uses this opportunity to comment on the office. In this case, the intern asks if his colleague hasn't checked the company's notice board. Without delay, Lee goes to check for himself, and upon inspecting, he realizes that there is indeed a sports event scheduled for Friday and Saturday. This makes our hero very anxious, and he wonders if he can skip the event, even though he's just an intern. He continues working normally but visibly shows his concern, knowing that if he attends, he will have to leave the restaurant unattended. Later, on the building's staircase, Lee takes out his phone, knowing that he'll have to resolve this with his superior. When his call is answered, the protagonist feels quite relieved and asks about the message he sent. In this case, the lawyer explains that he's already aware of the commitment that will keep the cook away from the restaurant for 2 days. Unexpectedly, the lawyer instructs our hero to attend the event, which leaves him very surprised. Without hesitation, he explains that he will send someone to replace the cook starting Friday night. However, Lee recalls that normal people would be frightened. Shin quickly assures him that it won't be a problem because the substitute will be his fourth brother. This reminds Lee that this brother is an interior designer, and he asks the lawyer if he can inquire about remodeling the restaurant's interior. Shin isn't sure if his brother will have time for that, but promises to ask, which Lee appreciates. Finally, the lawyer asks if the boy has anything else to ask, and Lee declines, thanking him and hanging up, now much more at ease. After hanging up, a girl passes by carrying some boxes and asks if Lee was talking to a client as he was speaking so politely. In response, the boy confirms and changes the subject by asking if she would like help with the heavy boxes. Unexpectedly, she declines, saying that carrying heavy boxes already counts as training for the upcoming sports event. This prompts Lee to comment that everyone seems to care a lot about this event, and the girl, surprised, asks if the intern isn't interested. The protagonist doesn't understand why she finds his decisions so surprising. Then the girl explains that during the sports event, there is a competition to select the most popular employee who will then be promoted to a full-time position. In this case, she advises that the best thing to do is to give his best on the day of the sports event. After learning about the motivations behind the event, the protagonist reflects on the prize. However, he realizes that he doesn't have a strong opinion about it yet, so it's better to stay quiet for now. This is because there are other interns in the office and some might want to cause trouble or harbor feelings of envy. This is exactly the kind of thing that Donghyun is subjecting himself to. On another day in the cafeteria, a message arrives on the protagonist's phone. Upon checking, he sees it's from Shin Sujo, the man who will take care of the shop over the weekend, so Lee thanks him for the help. Fortunately, the boy mentions that he also has something to discuss regarding the interior remodeling. Lee confirms that he's aware since he requested the boy's help and therefore asks if there's any problem with the place. Sujo explains that there isn't a problem, but that he's willing to renovate whatever the cook desires. In this case, Lee lists everything he needs, and the substitute informs him that he will proceed with the remodeling during this weekend. This news brightened the boy's day. However, inevitably, the time came to discuss the costs. Costs that, although necessary, will cost our hero a fortune. Back at the office, some people pass by Lee, and a woman mentions that he's the person they were talking about, the one who runs a restaurant and interns at the same time. In this case, the man in the group asks why he's working while already running a restaurant in Gangnam, but the woman doesn't know the answer. Nevertheless, he's determined to eat at the boy's restaurant someday, and the woman explains that he's also good at his job, though she thinks he'll quit soon. Lee, for his part, hears everything they're discussing around him and soon gets up as his shift ends. At that moment, he recalls what Donnie said about not even taking the internship seriously, so he shouldn't be proud of his temporary accomplishments. Though if he doesn't show it, he's aware of what's happening around him. The boy only pretends not to know, but the reality is quite the opposite. The company employees aren't wrong because he has to run the restaurant for 5 years, and therefore can't fully focus on his professional life. The reality is that for now, it's still too much for the protagonist to manage a restaurant. In this case, he questions why he's attending an event like this. Currently, Lee doesn't know if it's because he doesn't want to make his professor's recommendation a waste of time, or because he feels it's the only change he can experience. Moreover, he considers what the woman said about being there just to attract more regular customers. But regardless, the hero continues to follow the company employees out of the building. And upon leaving, the truth is that it always makes him feel pity for the people who work hard there. The next morning, the sports event begins and some employees cheer for Team Sales No. 1. Meanwhile, our hero's team enthusiastically cheers for Team Export 2. Various tournaments take place, with the current one being a table tennis championship. Seeing this, Lee thinks the atmosphere is more lively than he expected, and his colleagues continue to shout. However, upon closer inspection in the middle of the tournament, he notices some children, but it was clear that they weren't alive. Although they seem to enjoy the event to some extent, the hero still wonders where these little ones came from. Thus, the hero catches the attention of manager Kang, who is currently focused on the game. To satisfy his curiosity, the hero asks if there has ever been an accident at this academy. The manager explains that there was, but it happened a long time ago. About 6 years ago, there was an accident in the event center's parking lot, so the sports day wasn't held. The parking lot was moved to the basement, but at that time, there was a parking lot right next to the auditorium. People heard that it was a car accident, and he recalls that the victims were high school students. Some of them were injured and others ended up dying, but the final verdict was that the driver wasn't at fault. This left Lee confused, so Kang explained that the place was a parking lot and the situation at the time was recorded on the black box of a parked car. The car had its brake light on, which was clearly captured on video, meaning the driver was braking before the accident. However, even so, the car didn't stop, which is why he was considered innocent. But even after the video was released, public opinion didn't cool down, and eventually, things escalated further. After appearing in many news reports, the public demanded a trial, but the outcome remained one of innocence. That's because he was a high school teacher and the students he hit were his own. In such a case, there is no condemnation for a person like this, who will already have to deal with the guilt of his actions for the rest of his life. Nevertheless, the manager questions why the boy is so curious about this all of a sudden, and the hero realizes he saw those children at the tournament. In a certain restaurant, the ghostly children watch longingly, wishing they could taste the food. Their desire reaches such a high level that they press their cheeks against the glass. The children are very impressed with the food, but one of their friends tells them to stop looking since they won't be able to eat it anyway. Even though they know they can't eat, the girl still wants to try it, and suddenly, our hero enters the hall with plates of food in hand. The ghosts comment among themselves that the other employees are eating on the other side and wonder if this boy is alone to come and eat in this area. Despite this affecting our hero, he still says that he brought the food for the children to eat. However, they don't understand who the boy is talking to and are quite confused, seeing that he's not accompanied by any friends. To clarify, the protagonist reiterates that he's speaking to the children and invites them to come and eat. Hearing this, they become very scared because, in theory, no one should be able to see them. This kind of reaction was normal, but the hero was already used to it, and naturally, he called them to eat once more. With that, the children gradually lost their fear, and as they approached, they really started to eat, even though it was only the soul of the food. From a distance, the hero watches this and asks the children if the food is good. However, one of the children, though grateful, explains that it actually isn't because it only fills their bellies. It's said that ghosts can only eat the soul of food outside the ghost restaurant, which makes sense why there's no taste at all. In this case, Lee asked if they had ever heard of a restaurant where ghosts could eat delicious meals, and they became intrigued by this. The protagonist then confirmed that this place truly exists and was surprised that other ghosts hadn't told them about it. In response, the little girl explained that they've never encountered any other ghosts in this place besides themselves. She also mentioned that they can't leave, which made the hero think that these children might be the poltergeist type. Regardless, the children remember that this man can see them, and one of them asks if he's a shaman, as well as why he gave them food. In this case, Lee explains that his job is to feed ghosts, but they don't believe him because they saw that he works in an office. Despite this, the oldest of them still believes that, although it's strange, the man is probably not someone with bad intentions. In this case, one of the children approaches her benefactor and asks if she can request a favor. She asks the boy to contact their families since this is the first time they encountered someone who can see them. The child then explains that their parents must be worried and that they still have the desire to comfort their families. Hearing this, the hero asked if the little girl really wanted to tell her family about this. Another child quickly jumped into the conversation, saying, of course, they've been in this realm for 6 years. Lee understands the children's wishes, but believes that to tell the family, he would have to come up with a flimsy excuse, like saying he found them wandering around. Inevitably, such news would be very disrespectful to a family that has already gone through mourning. Therefore, the protagonist suggests that for the sake of the children and their families, instead of contacting them, it's better to choose a different approach. After hearing the boy's opinion, the child shouted, saying they knew it was his selfish desire, but they couldn't leave this place. The child then fell to the ground, very frustrated by everything that was happening. While crying, she reiterated that she was aware of all the problems that would come from doing this, but she no longer had anyone else to turn to. In the face of this distressing situation, Lee began to wonder if there was really a way to help these children. Unlike the ghosts he sees every weekend at the restaurant, these little ones seem very unstable. With this, he thinks that if he were at the restaurant, he could get help from other ghosts, but he's certain that the restaurant ghosts have already been through this type of situation, wanting to know what to do and having no idea where to go. At this moment, everything seems new and lonely for the children, but there must still be a way for them to become more stable. In this case, the hero started thinking about what it is that ghosts can only eat in a restaurant. So far, the protagonist isn't sure if his plan will work since it's only a guess, but he decides to give it a try. Thus, he asks if the children can only stay in the auditorium, to which the oldest of them explains that they can walk a bit within the training center as well. Hearing this, Lee invites the boy to come with him, which naturally confuses the child. In this case, the protagonist tightened his apron, and when the clock struck 11 o'clock, he declared that he was going to cook real food for them. After cooking, all the children began to eat and finally got to taste a well-prepared dish. After finishing their meals, they were very happy and grateful for the man's generosity in making them such good food. Seeing this, the girl advised her friends to eat everything because they wouldn't know when they could eat again. Initially, the hero was worried that they wouldn't be able to eat because they weren't in the restaurant, but it was confirmed that the important thing was the mealtime. Having encountered a living person who could talk to them for the first time, one of the children asked if the boy knew how they could leave the place. However, the hero had no idea. Unfortunately, the girl wasn't frustrated by this. The girl then recalled that this is the first time the boy has seen them, yet he's already doing so much for them, even cooking. She wants to feel like a child again, and since she can't tell her parents about her situation, she asks Lee to help them leave the gymnasium. The girl explains that because they can't move around, they can only think about their parents, and the hero understands that they're right. Although he doesn't know much about ghosts, it's likely that Mr. Sang-Shiol knows something, unlike Ba, who wouldn't even care. So after finishing washing the dishes, Lee explains that if it's that person, maybe they can help the children. The children inevitably become very anxious, already asking when he might come and what kind of person he is. In response, the cook describes this person as the great veteran of the little ones. After looking at each other for a while, the girls still can't figure out who this person might be. Changing the subject, the hero asks for the names of the little ones, so the first girl introduces herself as Ga Lun and the second as Lee Yerim. Next, Yun mentions that the older boy's name is Young Soo. As for himself, the protagonist also introduces himself and asks the children to call him comfortably, without formalities. Without delay, he explains that from now on, he will ask for help from the strongest ghost he knows, so the little ones should remain polite. Hearing this statement, the children understand that there seems to be a ranking among the ghosts, and Lee explains that they'll find out once they meet. Therefore, Lee performs the summoning ritual to call Kim So-hee to the hall. Quickly, she begins to manifest, bringing with her a dense energy that causes Young Soo to start feeling unwell. The moment she appears, Kim comments that this isn't the boys' restaurant. To maintain respect, the protagonist apologizes for summoning her so suddenly, and immediately explains that he called her because of these children who are greeting her. Even though she tries to be kind, the girl still makes a very scary face as she asks the kids not to be nervous. Getting straight to the point, Lee explains that these little ones are stuck in this place as ghosts, so he wanted to know how she could help them. Promptly, Sue says he wants to go home, and without delay, all his colleagues say the same. With that, holding her sword, Kim asks if the ghosts were bothering the cook about this. She then says that the children need to know that even the dead should have moderation in clinging to the living. And Lee, even though he can see and talk to ghosts, still has to admit that the worlds they belong to are different. Respectfully, the protagonist explains that he knows this, but seeing these children who died young asking for help makes him want to help them. With that, our hero bows and pleads for Mrs. Soe's help. In light of this, Kim asks the boy to step outside with her for a moment. Outside, Kim asks the cook not to get too involved with ghosts from now on, because although it's not wrong to feel pity, it's necessary to stop. Lee, for his part, explains that he may not be able to help all the ghosts, but even so, his heart is moved because they're children. In this case, the girl comments that they're just ghosts, but Lee states that's precisely why he's acting this way. Seeing that she won't win this argument, the girl tells the cook to do as he pleases. However, one thing still needs to be considered before anything else. It's said that only ghosts who can't accept their deaths become lingering spirits or poltergeists. Back in the gym, it's explained that if one forcibly cuts ties with the earth, some of the past memories become blurry as an effect, and the chance of ascension is reduced. Thus, it's necessary to think carefully because persistent attachment is also linked to ghostly regret. Cutting strong, lingering attachments to this degree undoubtedly comes with a significant price. However, the kids still want to leave more than anything. Emma also wants to be released as soon as possible, even though she doesn't yet know what her regret is. Sue, for his part, is happy to be heading in the same direction as his friend, and the hero watches their conversation from afar. In this case, he promptly goes to the boy and takes him to a distant spot. Upon reaching a slightly more secluded area, the protagonist says that the boy seems to already know what his lingering feelings are. With that, he asks for it to be resolved now, and Sue feels quite embarrassed for showing it. Feeling very ashamed, he asks if it's that obvious, and to comfort him, Lee comments that he's probably the only one who knows. To give context to the story, Sue explains that he's been friends with Yerim since elementary school and that during high school, he liked the girl. But he couldn't confess it because he didn't believe they could remain friends after making such a move. Then that damned accident happened, and when the car arrived, Sue and the other children couldn't move because they were scared and frozen. The boy tries to help avoid this, but the effect wasn't good at all. Upon hearing this story, Lee consoled the boy, saying that he did his best. And do explain that in the end, as he watched the car approaching and about to hit the children, he had the thought that he should have confessed his feelings. However, he questions what will happen to his friends if he ascends right now. Sad about them having to be left alone, Do comments that if he had noticed and moved a little faster, it might still be alive. Therefore, he doesn't want to confess just to make himself feel better. This statement deeply impacts the protagonist, and unable to wait any longer, Kim asks if she can proceed with her task, which Do agrees to and asks to be done. Moments before proceeding, Kim explains that when what ties them to the earth is released, they'll feel as if their bodies are floating. However, she tells them not to lose consciousness and to make sure to think of their bodies as something heavy that cannot move from its place. Hearing this, Un raises her hand and asks what will happen if she can't manage it. But Kim doesn't know either, which obviously disheartens the children greatly. Despite this, they gather, already preparing for what's to come, and say that if they fail, they should meet at 6 o'clock at the local park where they always played. Do reiterates this and asks his friends not to forget the appointed time. Without further delay, Kim tells everyone to get ready because she's about to begin. Then, drawing her sword from its sheath, she makes several cuts and finishes her movement by planting the sword into the ground. With that, a magical circle of blue fire is generated, and the energy is strong enough to produce a powerful wind that causes immense discomfort. From that circle of blue fire, energy forms resembling currents of water begin to emerge. And surprisingly, Lee can see the thread of lingering feelings that's holding the children to this place. Without hesitation, Kim charges at the threads with her sword and swiftly delivers a precise cut that severs them all at once. At this moment, the most crucial part of the process arrives, requiring the children's concentration. Do is the first to manage to stay grounded. However, Yerim begins to float despite being held by her friend. Inevitably, the girl can't focus and ends up being pulled away from the boy. In the end, Do falls into despair as he watches his beloved disappear before his eyes, unable to even confess his feelings. Also falling into despair, Lee begins to shout the girl's name, while Kim sheathes her sword, reminding them that she told them to concentrate. However, she couldn't be summoned by the ritual of calling her name. In this case, the boy asks where Yerim went, and Kim replies that she's somewhere in Jojin. But no matter how far she is, she won't be able to cross the borders of the underworld, which will keep her trapped in this place. Faced with this tragedy, Un asks her friend what they should do now. While wiping away his tears, Do explains that their friend will be okay because Un knows better than anyone that Yerim is a smart person. The girl agrees and remembers that Yerim was the smartest in their class, so all they can do now is believe in her. After doing everything that was asked, Kim states that she will leave and mentions that she'll visit the restaurant again in a few days. However, at this moment, Lee is suffering from what the children are going through, starting to feel a sense of guilt. Later, the time comes to announce the most popular intern in the sports competition, which ends up being Moon Sia. And after what happened the previous day, Yerim's disappearance continues to haunt the protagonist's mind. Although it was the three's will to free themselves from their earthly attachments, no one could have predicted a future that would be destroyed in this way. Lee, in turn, questions what he would have done differently, whether he should have approached those children from the perspective of a living person, or if he should have treated them as the owner of a restaurant that sits on the border between life and death. The manager notices Lee's depressive mood and tries to comfort him, saying that even though he didn't get the position, it was still good that he participated. However, the boy becomes increasingly depressed, and Kang is surprised because he didn't know the intern wanted to be hired so badly. In light of this, he continues to console him, saying that everything will be okay, and because he can't explain his true motivation, Lee simply thanks him. Later, back at the restaurant, Bob is surprised by what happened and comments that he was already wondering when he saw the heroes so down. Lee, for his part, still can't understand why Yerim didn't appear even after calling her 3 times. With that, Ba comments that he believes Yerim still hasn't learned, which intrigues the protagonist, prompting him to ask if it's necessary to learn in order to be summoned. In response, the blonde explains that when a person dies and becomes a ghost, they're not much different from a newborn. The common sense one has in life no longer applies, so they must learn to live as a ghost step by step, usually with the help of another ghost. However, typically, virgin ghosts tend to behave as such, and the same happens with solitary ghosts who tend to remain that way due to their energy. But somehow, there's a connection between the two, which is why it wouldn't be easy to approach them even if other ghosts were around. However, although it was an unexpected adventure, the blonde actually sees all of this as a happy twist of fate. He explains that it's unfortunate that they're separated from their friends, but if Lee hadn't appeared there, they would have remained trapped forever. In this way, he explains that it's not as if they'll never see Yerim again, and that through this opportunity they can learn what's necessary to reincarnate. Even so, Lee still isn't sure how to feel, and Ba, despite his attempt to console him, can see the cook's confused expression without even looking directly at him. At this moment, an agonizing pain takes over our hero's body as he tries to endure it. This is because the ghost doctor is performing acupuncture on his back to release the tension caused by the sports event exercises. His childhood friend, in turn, invites himself to play next time, but since he doesn't have a physical body, it wouldn't help. In response, the boy says he can possess the hero to play in his place. In this case, he is asked if he knows how to do it, and he replies that there is nothing he can't do. Initially, he thought it was risky to perform a possession, considering that Dr. Hio refused the last time. With this, the doctor explained that he refused because he wasn't familiar with it yet, and that it would be better to be cautious. Then after the medical session, Lee ends up feeling much better, and Hio asks for a fried egg as payment. However, the hero believes that 1 isn't enough, so he will make 2 in just a few minutes. After Lee leaves, the boy asks if possession is really so bad that it should be refused in an emergency. To explain, it is said that the body is like yin and yang when healthy, requiring harmony. But when a ghost, which can be called yin energy, enters the body, the harmony is broken. In this case, it is obviously logical to know that this disruption will not be good for the living, though it may seem contradictory for Hio, who is a ghost living in this restaurant. Still, it seems that keeping a boundary between the living and the dead is the best approach, despite inevitable circumstances. A dream comes to the hero's mind, recalling those children desperate over the disappearance of their classmate. Among the most desperate was the boy who couldn't live with this reality. However, Kim brought up the harsh truth that ghosts don't matter that much. Returning to reality, the hero still holds a feeling of guilt for not being able to do anything. While cooking, Ba asks the protagonist to find some free time this Saturday because there is a place where Lee should go with him. In this case, Lee understands that his colleague wants to buy another knife, but this is denied. Soon he explains that he actually wants to go to Wunamjiang, the restaurant young Su frequented when he was alive. A bit embarrassed, Ba explains that he heard the owner hasn't been feeling well lately. Anyway, he believes that his request isn't too much. But the protagonist didn't need convincing because he would go willingly even without knowing the reason. In this case, Ba asks the doctor to go along to possess him and thus check the owner's condition. Later, they arrive at the place and Lee is impressed that his colleague worked at such a fancy restaurant. And at the moment they enter the place, everyone starts to feel a strange energy. Quickly, people wanted excuses to leave, which leaves the protagonist very confused. In such a case, the hero remembers that Mrs. Soi will come, and Ba scolds him because things like this should be said in advance. Anyway, the boy asks the chef to find some time for them to go this Saturday. In the end, everyone ran out and Lee couldn't get used to it no matter how many times he saw it. After a bit of waiting, the girl's spirit finally begins to materialize and our hero is happy about the customer's arrival. Kim asks if it's okay to greet her in front of the restaurant and Lee apologizes, already asking what her order would be. In this case, the girl explains that she wants to eat the fried chicken feet that Bakre used to make for her. However, the hero doesn't remember which page the recipe for this dish was on. Kim, on the other hand, believed the cook would still be shocked by the child's disappearance, but he was better than expected. After a few moments, the dish is served perfectly at the table. The protagonist explains that besides the original recipe, he also added a burning flavor with a blowtorch, which might be different from the original. Kim understands that this is why the smell is different, and fortunately, she is content with the performance. After eating, the girl decided to ask if the hero still cared about the children from that gymnasium. And about this, Kim offered a shot glass to the cook, taking a drink while venting. Promptly, Lee accepts the kindness of his customer and soon begins to speak everything. He says that the situation from days ago still bothers him, and the girl believes it's understandable considering his sincerity. However, the emotion that should be felt was not guilt or something like that. This is because the hero is now working for the people on the other side of life, but he still looks at the ghosts the same way he looks at the living. This makes Lee think a lot, and with the shot glass in his hand, he decides to give his version. After taking over the shop, he was anxious and afraid of the fact that he was dealing with ghosts. However, so far, all the ghosts he has seen were very similar to ordinary humans. So for him, thinking of these two worlds separately was very difficult, which irritated the girl. Furious, she asked to be clearly heard from now on. She comments that deep affection sometimes narrows a person's vision and makes them stubborn, just like the cook. Kim questions if Lee believes she's drawing a line like this just to give a sermon about his prejudice. She explains that if the hero does not find the right balance in the end, he will be the one to suffer. Because in this world, boundaries exist precisely to deal with things like this. After much work, the agreed-upon day to visit the Woonamjong restaurant finally arrives. And in the Plum Blossom room, Lee, already very anxious, believes he is doomed. That's because when he arrived, he caused an embarrassing scene by asking to see the owner. Even though he was a bit embarrassed, thanks to his boldness, you will probably see him soon. Bob, in turn, explains that this room is exclusive to esteemed guests, something that should be a source of pride. Anyway, the boy asks what is wrong with the hero's expression, and despite not showing it, Lee finds it strange to be in Ba's workplace without him. Later, the owner finally arrives, greeting the guest who came to see him. With a smile, the chef says he came by demand and introduces himself as Kim Bong-nam. Showing due respect, the hero bows and introduces himself as a friend of Bae Yong-soo, which the chef receives with enthusiasm. The boy's spirit, meanwhile, begins to play with his former boss, happy to hear him in good condition. The chef in turn comments that since the hero is someone who knows Ba, it will be possible to talk comfortably. He explains that even though they were not close relatives, he still considered him his own son. With this, while Ba was crying with emotion, our hero agreed with the terms. Anyway, Bong-nam asks how they met, and Lee explains that he met him at the Punggol market. Indeed, this was a place that Cook frequented when he was bored. Then he is asked what the hero does for work, and he replies that he is running a small restaurant in Nanyang. In this case, the chef explains that to do business in this area, considerable skills are necessary. In response, Lee explains that he hasn't been cooking for long but received a lot of help from Young-soo, and thanks to him, he is now able to do his best to cook for his customers. Although a bit suspicious, Bong-nam understands and believes that his godson must be proud to hear this. And indeed, he was, to the point where he couldn't stop smiling for a moment. With this, Lee remembers the real reason he decided to come here today. And Bong-nam makes the hero comfortable to speak, even though it is something embarrassing. In this case, the doctor's spirit explains that the pulse should be examined by naturally holding his hands. However, it was easy to say this, but extremely difficult to find a reason to do so. Ba, in turn, wanted to lend his hand but couldn't do it because he no longer had a body. So he asked for help from the only person he had left, which is the cook of the restaurant from beyond. Anyway, the hero still doesn't understand why his companion is making such a fuss about such a simple request. Quite directly, Lee asks to hold Bong-nam's hand, who is initially confused. However, upon further explaining that it was something he saw in a dream, the chef sees no problem. At this moment, his invisible hand manages to analyze and notice that the cook's pulse is very cold. Moreover, his blood circulation is not flowing well, which explains the temperature. Unfortunately, it seems that Bong-nam does not have enough energy due to his poor liver condition. But the problem is that his kidneys are also not in good condition, which deeply saddens Ba. He remembers that his master was a very healthy person in the past and doesn't understand the reason for the decline. Once again, quite boldly, going straight to the point, Lee asks when was the last time the chef had a checkup. He replies that it has been a long time and therefore asks the reason for the question. In response, even though the man might not believe him, Lee explains that Bong-nam is probably having problems with his liver and kidneys. In this case, Bong-nam asks if the boy also studied medicine because he speaks with a good understanding just by examining the pulse. Anyway, Lee simply asks the man to visit the doctor and see his situation for himself. Doing this didn't bring any benefit to the hero, but he couldn't leave his friend alone with such a sad expression. To explain, Lee comments that he believes Young-soo appeared in his dream for this purpose. And for this reason, he reiterates the need for the chef to go to the doctor to seek treatment. Lee is now someone who can easily reach out the hand that ghosts so desperately wish to touch. And just like in his previous experiences, he must use this to connect places that can never be crossed. Most likely, he believes this is what he should do for this side that Mrs. Sui mentioned. With this, Gangnam gives in and states that he will get a checkup soon, which makes everyone very happy. However, he explains that he will do this only if Lee does him a favor. So the hero agrees and says he will do anything as long as it's not about money. Yet Gangnam shows no expression about this, and the protagonist starts to understand he's gotten himself into trouble. Going through a lot of suffering, our hero laments that he shouldn't have said anything. And acting like his boss, Gangnam declares it's lunchtime. Therefore, the protagonist needs to make kimbap for lunch while being supervised by everyone. He believes this shouldn't be hard to do, but he is getting increasingly anxious. In this case, the chef asks him to think of it as making a meal for a friend and to relax, which isn't wrong. Ba, in turn, says he will help his friend since he's never cooked outside of the restaurant. However, the hero says he will try to do it alone, and the ghost is ready to help when necessary. At this moment, Lee decides to think he's serving lunch for a friend's father, not the great chef of Gangnam. Recalling all the experiences he has had so far, the protagonist believes there is nothing to fear and begins cooking with the rice. For the kimbap recipe, you must first wash the rice very well, and cooking it with seaweed improves the umami. After tasting the ingredients, Lee realizes that fortunately they are fresh, so he washes the cucumbers and salts them. Additionally, he cuts the carrots into thin slices, fries them, and quickly places the ingredients to assemble. After a few more moments and a few cuts, the food was ready to be tasted by everyone. In the end, Lee made the kimbap as requested, but there are still many people to evaluate his first kimbap. Lee feels overwhelmed by so much attention, and since he refused Ba's help, Ba seems too grumpy to assist now. With that, Gangnam comes closer to taste a piece of the dish that his friend said his former godson prepared. And upon tasting it, he smiles and calls his cooks to eat together. Soon, several pieces are picked up with chopsticks and tasted, leaving Lee nervous about the lack of communication. Fortunately, after tasting it, the cooks approves, saying it is delicious. One of them says the rice's cooking measure was perfect and the ingredients were also seasoned precisely. However, the most important thing was that the ingredients were properly positioned in the center. With this, Ba congratulated the hero for passing the test, and Lee doesn't understand what test this is. Then it is explained that even though it seems simple, kimbap is still a fundamental dish in Korean cuisine. It requires delicate preparation and precise knife work with different ingredients and seasonings. Additionally, there is also an aesthetic composition, and that is why whenever a new recruit arrives, the master has them make this dish to test them. After eating, Gangnam returns to the kitchen and invites Lee to eat a bowl of noodles that is already prepared as a reward. And soon, the two begin to enjoy the dish together, but it was too delicious. Even though it was made quickly and simply, the dish still lived up to the name of the true taste of Gangnam. Gangnam, in turn, doesn't speak so highly of his dish, but Lee doesn't stop praising it. Changing the subject, the chef apologizes for the inconvenience of asking the hero to cook. And indeed, it affected Lee a bit since he had never done it before. Apologies are once again made, and the chef explains that he needed to test the culinary skills of his godson's friend. Gangnam says that knowing Lee runs a restaurant on his own reminded him of the old days, and that's why he thought of helping. Because a friend of someone who is like a son to him deserves at least a photo to hang in his shop. In this case, Lee understands what is being proposed, a poster in his shop with the chef's approval, which could attract customers. However, the chef explains that after tasting the boy's dish, his thoughts have completely changed. Because although it may not be perfect, Gangnam can feel the time and effort invested in the research to improve his cooking. He explains that for someone who is already finding their own path, help can sometimes be harmful. And with that, the chef comments that our hero does not need his help now. So all he can do now is make himself available to help Lee whenever he has difficulties with cooking. And when asked, Gangnam will take care of Lee as his senior chef before being a friend's father. Following this speech, Lee calls Ba, and the boy quickly comes over to check. Then, extremely moved, the hero states that the chef is an incredible person, making the boy proud. One of the cooks, in turn, approaches, hugging Lee for being the restaurant's guest of honor. At first, everyone thought the boy was an apprentice because of the dish he made, but now everyone understands the hero's worth. Furthermore, one of them suggests that Lee leave his restaurant to become an apprentice at theirs. All of this creates a very friendly atmosphere, and for Ba, the nostalgic feeling is what is most lingering. In the end, Lee managed to make the boy's day by bringing his old colleagues together in such a pleasant moment. In another area, a car drives at speed through a forest, but when it passes over a rock, it shakes all over. Due to the low resistance of the suspension, this causes the hero to wake up from his sleep. Upon waking up, he apologizes for having dozed off, and the driver has no problem with it. Anyway, he remembers that he made some plans for a trip after eating and talking at Wunamjong. However, now they are far from civilization, on a road in the mountains. Gangnam, however, hadn't told him anything about this, and the situation started to get tense for Lee. Apologizing again, the hero asks where they are going, and the chef explains they are going for that checkup. He recalls that the protagonist was desperately begging, so a reservation was made in a hurry for the same day. However, Lee asked why he was going along, and Gangnam replied by recalling the dream the boy had. In his view, it would be beneficial if he confirmed his suspicions, and soon the two arrived at the place. However, this was not a very common place in medicine, as it was a temple in the forest. Definitely, this is the biggest temple Lee knows, so he's glad he didn't bring Bae-young-soo along. That's because the boy definitely wouldn't be able to enter, being expelled by the gate of the four heavenly kings. In the end, despite the path being complicated, the two arrive safely, and the chef explains that he comes here often because it's the site of Ba's tomb. Moreover, this is a place where he can see his deceased and also receive medical treatment. Gangnam, in turn, believes that the hero should say hello first. The protagonist asks if they shouldn't go together, and the chef explains that he has to go somewhere else first. With that, he points to the building where the tomb is and says that the boy will love it when he knows his friend is here. When they look at the gravestones, it makes them believe that Ba is really dead. In this case, Lee thinks he should have asked more about Ba on the way so he could find something to help him. In fact, after arriving at the gravestone building and carefully examining all the funeral places, Lee realizes he can't find the memorial stone of Yong-soo among them. Therefore, the protagonist believes he is in trouble because he can't read Hanja, which are Chinese characters. Then a person indicates that the memorial stone on the left belongs to Mr. Bai Yong-soo, and the hero thanks them. This person is a monk who greets the boy with his traditional methods. The monk, in turn, comments that the man in front of him must be the one who does good deeds. And despite trying to deny it, the monk asks if he is not the hero who feeds the hungry, to which Lee, somewhat distressed, does not lie. Anyway, the scholar asks how the boy's work is going, and understanding that this man recognizes him, the hero comments that he must already know what he is doing. Then the monk affirms again, as he said before, that the boy does the work of providing meals to those who are hungry. Therefore, he directly asks if Lee is the man who is working in the restaurant of the afterlife. Quite scared, the hero asks how the man knows this, and he replies that this is what they call an inexplicable connection. Suddenly, the chef arrives at the scene, happy to see the monk there. He then introduces the man to the hero, saying he is Da-yeon, someone who, besides being a monk, is a prominent figure in Korean medicine. Thus, the monk introduces himself in his own words and asks why the boy came along. In this case, the hero explains that he regretted not being able to say goodbye to his friend on his last journey. Upon hearing this, the monk understands and apologizes for interrupting this moment of reunion. Anyway, the protagonist says he is already done, so the two can talk comfortably. Changing the subject, Da-yeon believes it's likely that Gangnam has come to deal with health issues. In light of this, the monk asks if Lee would like to join them for a cup of tea. This is because he believes that the whole diagnosis will trigger a long and laborious story. Later, at the designated place, Lee begins to take off his shoes to enter the residence. Thinking further, he understands that the monk worked as an Oriental doctor before converting to Buddhism, but is still strange for him to have knowledge about the restaurant of the afterlife. In this case, the hero wonders if he is powerful enough to see things that normal people cannot see. After finishing the examination, it is confirmed that the chef's kidneys and liver are not in good condition, exactly as the boy said. For some reason, Gangnam had been thinking he was a bit more tired than usual. Then the monk explains that this is the sign of his body crying out for help. Anyway, he is asked how long the treatment will take, and it is said that he will need to be treated 2 days a week. Upon hearing this, Gangnam is happy it isn't too much time, but Da-yeon says he isn't sure, and his chef apologizes for jumping to conclusions. It is then said that for 2 days every week, a chef should come there, and he should do acupuncture until he feels better. However, this idea was not exciting. That's because the acupuncture would be done with a long needle, which inevitably made the chef go through many uncomfortable days. Lying in his bed, the cook rests, and Lee receives a call from Taekwang Trading Company. He answers, and the company's employee apologizes for calling during the holidays, introducing himself as Soo-hong from HR. To get straight to the main point, he heard about the restaurant run by the boy, and when asked where he heard about it, he explained that manager Choi recommended it with high praise. For this reason, Soo-hong wants to make a reservation for 4 people this Saturday, and Lee accepts while being pestered by dogs. Finally, the boy asks Lee to be there at 12:30 and prepare a menu for Chinese clients. With this, the hero agrees and hopes the clients enjoy their meal later, ending the call. Returning to normal, the hero approaches the monk and asks how the master's condition is. Da-yeon explains that he will sleep for a bit, but is in normal condition. Sitting beside the man, Lee thinks he really wants to ask about the restaurant of the afterlife. And taking the initiative initiative, the monk offers a drink, which the protagonist accepts without problems. After gathering his courage, he asks how the monk knows about the restaurant of the afterlife. In response, Dae-hyun recalls that when he was young, he had many encounters with the afterlife. In this case, Lee asks if the man has ever been to his restaurant under Mrs. Bak-rae's management. However, the monk denied it, saying he visited one in a different region, which left Lee surprised because he thought there was only one. To be more specific, Dae-hyun says there are many regions that serve meals to departed souls, with at least 9 throughout the country. In any case, the hero understands that there are many ghosts in the world, so it wouldn't make sense to have only one restaurant. Moreover, there are similar places in other countries, so after the explanation, the monk asks if his doubts have been cleared. However, the hero still has one more question, which is how he knew he was running such a restaurant. In response, Dae-hyun says he just knew by looking like a supernatural power. However, he decides to keep the other various details a secret. On that day, the protagonist learned many things, but it seemed that there was always more to discover. Later, back in the city, all the required dishes were prepared according to Chinese cuisine. The HR employee in turn was happy that everything went well and praised the food as everyone loved it. The hero then understands he has done a good job researching Chinese food with his assistant. However, upon closer look, he realizes it's his first time seeing a ghost following the guests wherever they go. Soo-hong asks for a moment with the cook, and Lee quickly offers to meet all their needs. Translating what his elder says, the boy explains that the old man is grateful for the hospitality and wants to offer a drink. With this, the hero accepts, but the ghost beside him was bothering him a lot by standing still without moving. Inevitably, the two exchange glances and the ghost smiles at Lee, who becomes even more uneasy and disconnected from reality. Seeing this, Lee wonders if the ghost doesn't know this is a restaurant of the afterlife, as the man still hasn't eaten anything. To make an excuse, the cook explains that he will step out to bring more food, and the customers understand without complaining. However, before leaving, the hero excuses himself and asks the ghost to come with him to the kitchen. After a few moments, he prepares the soul of stir-fried pork with red pepper. This is because it was a dish the ghost probably hadn't tried, as it wasn't Korean. Without delay, the man gladly accepts, and Lee understands that he can communicate even without speaking Chinese. After eating, the ghost introduces himself as Wang Kang-jun and says it is a pleasure to meet Lee. The hero, in turn, reciprocates and explains that it is his first time meeting a Chinese ghost. Since it's difficult for souls to go abroad, Kang-jun explains that he just followed those who were close to him. In this case, Lee asks, startled, if the boy is actually the guardian spirit of the old man Wan Noya. In response, Kang-jun isn't sure if he is a guardian spirit, but comments that the man is his younger brother. This causes even more astonishment because with his appearance being the older brother indicates that the ghost is already over 50 years old. And being a soul, it was inevitable that he had been alone for a long time. In such a case, Lee asks if the boy stays out of concern, but Kang-jun can't answer precisely. However, even the Reaper had already told him that he couldn't ascend to the heavens due to his lingering feelings. Seeing this, the hero asks if lingering concerns really last that long, and he questions if perhaps the ghost doesn't remember anything else from his life. Then, in response, Kang-jun explains that even his remaining memories are becoming blurry. This was definitely a situation similar to Yerim's with her friends. So to change this situation, Lee asked if there was anything else the boy would like to eat. And although he refused to ask for another dish, the hero insisted, saying he wanted to prepare something that touched his feelings. Due to the insistence and pressure making him embarrassed, the ghost reveals he would like to eat noodles with egg. The memory of the Wang brothers is of noodles with egg, but the ingredients and the recipe were simpler than expected. The green onion used for seasoning is sliced thinly, and the fine noodles are lightly boiled and then strained. Inevitably, the old man smells that food and heads to the kitchen. With a nostalgic feeling, he says he misses that smell, and the hero welcomes him. Continuing, the protagonist explains that he heard the old man liked noodles, so he decided to make a simple one. This impresses Kang-jun because the cook can communicate in another language. All of this was due to the effects of the restaurant, and soon the eggs were beaten in the bowl. Then they were quickly mixed with the noodles to prevent them from cooking from the heat. It is said that eggs were very precious when Kang-jun was alive, and he couldn't even imagine having them in abundance as he does now. So he would only buy a few eggs when he earned money and would soon cook them for his younger brother. He loved it very much, even though he always ate simple noodles. However, the moment he tried it with the eggs, he said he felt as if he had become an emperor. The recipe is a bowl of noodles with egg made for Mr. Kang-jun, but is also a dish that holds the memories of Wan Noya, which makes it necessary to serve it with great respect. Soon the two sat down to eat, and the first to taste was the old man, whose eyes were shining. Other ghosts often recall some of their past stories when they eat their favorite foods, but it seems that noodles with egg may not be enough to evoke Kang-jun's memories. Anyway, the ghost asks the cook to give his brother some raw garlic. It is said that he likes to eat this meal along with a bowl of raw garlic. Without delay, the protagonist brings it to the table, which greatly surprises the old man with the cook's knowledge. The HR employee then asks about the name of the dish, which is said to be the Emperor's Noodles. However, Wang Noya explains that he was the one who invented this name because this dish was something made only between him and his brother. And although simple in those old times, this dish was the most delicious thing in the world. With this, he says that a drink to go with it would make everything even more perfect, so Soo-hong goes to fetch one. After eating quite a bit, the old man explains that since their parents were not around, his brother was the one who raised him. Thus, it is said that he was like a father and a mother to him. And even though his memories are blurred, the old man still remembers his brother as someone trustworthy and worthy. But sometimes he can't help but feel that he was abandoned when he was young. Hearing this, Lee asks about what was just said. It is explained that the boy's parents passed away due to the war and Kang Jun had to take on the responsibility. There were times when he had to leave his brother to go out and work. And on a fateful day, he remembered feeling that the way home was far away. He thought that resting for a while would help, but for some reason, he didn't remember anything anymore. Thinking logically, it was likely that his death happened at that moment, leaving his hungry brother behind. This account could be related to a case of sudden death. The hero himself has seen situations like this while working in construction, with a colleague fainting from work. That said, Wang Noya explains that he was 8 years old when this happened, and his brother did not return for more than a week. On the first day, he was worried, but after a week, the feeling turned into anger. That's because despite initially being concerned about his family members' well-being, over time, all the worry was replaced by the painful hunger that only grew. So one day, the old man decided to leave home and did everything he could to avoid starving to death. It was exhausting, and many times he thought that dying would be the best way out. But one day he had a thought. Wang Noya thought that if it was so hard to survive, his brother, who had to take care of both of them, must have abandoned him because of it. However, the hero shouted, saying that it was not true, which startled both of them. He was asked why he shouted, but Lee just continued saying that it wasn't true. He says he believes that the person who cared so much for his brother wouldn't abandon him like that. With this, he gives his opinion that there must be other reasons beyond his control. However, the old man denies this possibility and insists that his brother definitely abandoned him. Thus, confusion takes over Lee, and in response, Wang Noya explains that if the abandonment isn't real, it means that his brother died the day he didn't come home. And even so, Lee resented his poor brother for decades, which would be very cruel. In an overview of things, Lee thinks that during this time, Kang Jun was always watching everything. And even being by his brother's side as the guardian spirit, it seemed more like a punishment. There was a situation where he couldn't defend himself or offer comfort to his younger brother, who blamed himself. For a long time, he must have wanted to tell him and reassure him that he didn't abandon him, or that he is very sorry and never thought of leaving him alone. Anyway, the old man is trying to accept this new version of the story now. That's because the long years have revealed that being resentful of someone for decades is not so different from missing them. In the end, the fact that he can't forget the taste of these noodles with egg is proof of this. Knowing the reality and accepting it are different things, and even so, Wang Noya finally gathered the courage to accept it. With this, Lee apologized for bringing up such a heavy topic during a pleasant meal. Changing the subject, the old man recalls that his brother said they should drink all night when they became adults. In this case, the sun is still high and his brother is not there, so Lee is invited to drink. Thus, the old man repeats his invitation and asks if the cook intends to join him. Recalling the phrase about drinking, Lee believes there must be a clue about Kang Jun's lingering feelings in it. Wang Noya, in turn, comments that in the first 10 years, he was completely resentful. And in the next 10 years, his memories slowly faded until everything became just faded memories. At this moment, the old man can't even remember his brother's face. But while eating this bowl of noodles, he can at least remember the sound of his laughter. The voice of his older brother was present, telling him to eat a lot and share his portion with him. This was something that Wang Noya could definitely hear when recalling a moment. In the past, the old man's brother used to scold him for the lack of manners the little one had committed. With that, kneeling on the floor, young Wang Noya apologized for his words and was asked what he had done wrong. In this case, in tears, he recalls that he begged his brother to buy him some sweets. And even then, Kang Jun said he wouldn't buy anything for him, which was interpreted as a lack of love. Seeing this, the older brother asked his younger sibling to promise he would never say that again in the future. But in the end, the little one again misunderstood, saying that these actions were because his brother didn't want to play with him. He also recalls that Kang Jun always came home late, and despite promising to play, he continued going out to work. In such a case, the older brother explained that he had to work so that both could have food to eat, even though he truly had little time. Yet even so, when he came home, he had to hear such painful things. Anyway, tugging at his shirt, Wang Noya told him he was hungry. Naturally, he explains that he was patiently waiting to eat with his brother, even though he was hungry. And that was enough to make Kang Jun happy again, so he went on to prepare the beloved noodles with egg. After the dishes were served, Wang Noya noticed that his brother was drinking something alone. However, the older brother explained that it was something only adults could drink. But that explanation was not enough to convince a child to the point of losing interest. So Kang Jun promised that the day his younger brother became an adult, the two would drink together until dawn. And to ensure the statement wasn't just an empty, meaningless promise, Wang Noya suggested that they make a pinky promise, which they did that day. As much as the boy was both the father and an older brother to the little one, he believes he should have given him more. However, because of a few coins, he ended up making his younger brother feel lonely. It is said that the older brother always made empty promises to his brother and didn't even manage to keep a single one. In the end, he believes he was a burden to his relative his entire life, not deserving to be remembered by him. Seeing this, Lee becomes increasingly depressed and Wang Noya fills the last glass. And before drinking, the old man says he wants to make a promise to his brother who is gone. He vows that on the day they meet again, he will make him the emperor's noodles. The old man's brother was always bad at keeping his promises, so this will be one that will be fulfilled. However, at the moment the glass was handed over, the hero gave it to the ghost. It was a fact that this moment did not belong to him but to Kang Jun, as his brother had already forgiven him. With this might be the last chance to fulfill his old promise to the old man. And at the moment the two drink together, something feels different to Wang Noya. Unexpectedly, he can see the image of his younger brother in front of him, drinking with him. And Kang Jun asks his brother to return a little slower and a bit later. That's because he cannot surpass Wang Noya's patience, but the Hiran will still wait a little longer. And also about the promise to drink together, the boy finally apologizes for taking so long. With this, the pinky promise between the two is finally fulfilled, and with tears in his eyes, Kang Jun begins to ascend to the heavens. Even after decades, Kang Jun had not forgotten the promise he made. So now Lee asks the boy to rest at ease in his afterlife, as he deserves. And finally, Wang Noya remembers that he once said that if he earned a lot of money, he would make his brother eat in abundance. Then he suggested various meals of noodles with egg, and even though there were many other dishes, that was enough for the two. Having experienced such a strong emotional event, the old man collapsed on the ground. And when people came to his aid, he recalled hearing someone call him Xiaobo. Seeing this, the customers remembered that this was the old man's nickname when he was a child. Then he explains that the voice was telling him to return slowly and that he would be waiting. But that voice was definitely the voice of his older brother, who had been gone for so long. After these events, while cleaning the restaurant, the hero still wasn't sure what happened. However, it seems that Wang Noya was able to hear Kang Jun's voice as a true miracle. In this case, Lee thinks that this one-meal restaurant becomes more mysterious the more he learns about it. With this, he wonders if there is anything that can surprise him, although there have already been some surprises. And at this moment, he finds some checks in his hand. He doesn't remember when they appeared, but he recalls that the same thing happened when the other ghosts ascended. Anyway, after examining them, Lee just thanks and thinks he will use them carefully. Running this one-meal restaurant is much more rewarding than the boy thought. The job requires a lot of attention, time, and effort, but he can feel the customer's satisfaction in his skin. Honestly, the money is also good when it comes in ways like this. However, the more he hears the ghost stories and understands them, the more he worries about those outside the restaurant. Lee believes there must be ghosts like Mr. Kang Jun who can't just pass through the restaurant. In this case, he decides to contact the lawyer to find out if he can interact with ghosts outside the establishment. The call starts, and in his car, lawyer Shin answers, already asking what the problem is. Thus, the hero's situation is explained, and he asks what he should do about the ghosts outside the restaurant. From what the lawyer heard, he believes it's likely that the cook has interacted with ghosts from other places. So without lying, Lee explains that he didn't want to pretend he didn't see what he was seeing, but didn't call just to make excuses. In the end, he just wanted to avoid pretending not to see the ghosts whenever he wished to help them. Shin, in turn, is glad that the boy is adapting well to the restaurant, and he soon asks the cook if he knows why the heroes in movies hide their identities. Then he explains that too much attention tends to interfere with actions and plans. Therefore, overwhelming attention directed at specific individuals can make this kind of thing difficult. The hero doesn't understand, so it is said that if the ghosts know there is someone who wants to hear their stories and fulfill their wishes, naturally, everyone will be tempted to gather and ask the boy for help. Not only in his personal life, but this could also interfere with his work at the restaurant. Seeing this, Lee understands that something like this can really happen, but Shin still asks the boy to try. That's because he and his brothers were welcomed by their mother and lived next to the restaurant. Until now, they all saw more ghosts and heard more stories than the hero has encountered. Obviously, the brothers' reactions were all different, with some listening and others trying to solve the problems. In this case, for now, the boy was asked to follow his heart, because all the warnings were just the lawyer's concerns being expressed. However, he is told not to forget that those the cook is dealing with are not ordinary living people. Thus, the hero explains that he is not someone so extreme, and at that moment, the call is disconnected. Lee didn't quite understand this abruptness, but the lawyer was in traffic. Anyway, now it was decided that he could follow his heart despite the warnings. In the end, they are all ghosts, but Lee will still do his best to understand their stories and emotions. At least once, the protagonist decides to try to do things his way. After all, he is the owner of this restaurant, and even if he makes a mistake, Shin assured him that he would unfortunately cover for it. In Seoul, Gangnam-gu in the Nanyang-dong district, at 7:10 in the evening, when a busy day begins to wind down, Lee Kang-jin, 28 years old, is on his way back to the one-meal restaurant to start the activities. However, upon arriving there was a person, even though it was not a time to expect customers. Anyway, a boy does not understand who could be hungry at such an early hour. However, the figure seemed too familiar because it was Master Gangnam. Initially, the hero was going to ask why he came, but more importantly, he wanted to know how he found the place. The one-meal restaurant is a place built for ghosts on human land, and to prevent humans from encountering ghosts, there is something equipped in the place. With this, if there are ghosts in the place, living people cannot find the restaurant and end up wandering around its surroundings. But despite there being some inside the place, the chef still managed to find it with extreme ease. Anyway, to avoid being rude, Lee invites the man to enter his establishment. Upon entering, Gangnam explains that the lights were on and the boy had left them that way for the ghosts to see. In any case, the hero wonders where Ba is because he loves his master and is not there. To start a conversation, Lee explains that if he had been notified in advance, he would have arrived on time. Then the chef asks if a reservation is necessary and the hero denies it, saying it's just a regular restaurant. However, the menu of the place was indeed unique. There were only 2 main dishes, and the rest was up to choice. In this case, Gangnam asks if the boy doesn't suffer from a lack of staff, because even being a skilled chef, it's difficult to handle a random menu. In response, the protagonist explains that he is also working at a company, so the operating hours are limited and manageable. Continuing, he informs that he is working as an intern at Taekwang Trading. But for someone who has a restaurant in the heart of Nanyang, working as an intern at a company is confusing. So Lee anxiously comments that for various personal reasons, he had to work 2 jobs. Obviously, even though the hero decided to do what he wanted, he still couldn't reveal the whole truth. Seeing this, the man commented that when he was young, he also had to work in many places. Getting to the main point, Lee asks what his customer has in mind to eat tonight. However, Gangnam doesn't have anything in mind and wants to try the best dish the cook can offer him. In this case, our hero runs off to think calmly in the kitchen, and upon arriving there, unexpectedly, his assistant didn't seem to be around. However, the moment the protagonist thought he had ascended on his own, he appeared behind Lee asking about his master and almost scaring him to death. Very scared, the hero informs him that the master has already entered and the boy understands. Anyway, Lee asks for all the other ghosts that were always there are, and Ba explains that he drove them all out because he couldn't let his master wander the streets alone. In this case, the hero asks why his colleague didn't come in immediately, and he comments that if a ghost stays near his master, it might worsen his health. Seeing this, Lee asks if the same thing doesn't happen with him, but it is said that it doesn't with some bluntness. Therefore, the hero feels sad about Ba's attitude, and to apologize, the ghost explains it was just a joke. Anyway, the master will leave after dining at the restaurant, so a menu must be thought of. Suddenly, someone enters the restaurant, and this someone is another human customer. A customer who is already known, Old Man Wang Noya, who asks if he can have dinner at this restaurant tonight. Lee promptly accepts and asks if there is anyone else to dine with the gentleman. Then Wang Noya explains that his daughter has business to attend to and his son-in-law has gone to the broadcast station. So the hero understands and asks what the man wants for dinner, receiving the same open request as Gangnam. With this, he asks both of them to wait for a moment, and inevitably an uncomfortable atmosphere sets in. To lighten the mood, the chef asks if the old man would like to sit with him so they don't remain alone. Soon, Wang Noya accepts and praises Gangnam's pronunciation when speaking Chinese. However, after the two sit together, silence again becomes their reality. From another perspective in the kitchen, the food is being prepared and the old man smells grilled tofu with perilla oil. And at this moment, the two understand that if this dish is fried, it becomes a perfect snack to accompany drinks. Back in the kitchen, Lee just thinks that tofu should be good for the master's health. Then he asks Ba to check the pan that was placed on the stove. And time passes with a delicious smell surrounding the entire restaurant area. Later, somewhere on the Korean peninsula, Kim walks through a field of white flowers. But at a certain moment, she notices the presence of a lost girl in the middle of the thicket. Without delay, she approaches the little girl and touches her back, surprising her. Fortunately, it was Urim, and after much searching, Kim finally managed to discover where she was. With a smile on her face, the girl pulled Urim by the hand to finally take her to her old friends. After a lot of work, the dish was ready, so the need now was to serve it as quickly as possible. The chosen meal was beef abalone porridge and sweet crispy tofu, made with an adult's body in mind. But the moment Lee approaches with a tray carrying the meal, a bottle is spotted on the floor. The hero almost trips but manages to dodge, and his customers are already tipsy from drinking. The chef in turn gets quite excited that the proper dishes are ready. Without taking any pause, the two continue drinking non-stop even though they are already completely intoxicated. With this, Lee remembers that Gangnam asked him for a bottle of soju some time ago, but he didn't expect them to drink so much. Anyway, he serves the beef abalone porridge and crispy sweet tofu to both of them. In the end, Lee is happy that the two seem to be getting along well, despite having a ghost behind them. After serving the dishes, the hero asks the master not to drink so much considering his health issues. Bong then thanks him for everything and praises the boy's cooking skills. However, he comments that the restaurant is a bit colder than usual, which the old man agrees with. Despite this comment, Lee feels normal, but when he looks at the clock, he realizes it is almost 11 o'clock. In this case, Lee makes an excuse, inventing that this is probably due to the two of them drinking. Seeing this, the old man understands that they don't need to stay longer since they've already had a good time, and Bong Nam agrees. Moreover, they both praise the time they had at the restaurant and the quality of the meal. Wang Noya, in turn, explains that the dinner was even more perfect because he met someone to drink with. Finally, the old man says he will leave the money for the meal on the counter, and the chef does the same but also leaves a welcome gift for his dear friend. Lee tries to say that none of this is necessary, but the chef explains that the price is sometimes determined by the customer. Additionally, he says the gift is a drink produced annually at Wunamjang, and since Lee is a cook, he brought it for him to taste. As he leaves the restaurant, the chef asks if his new friend called a taxi, and the man says his son-in-law would pick him up. Lee, in turn, just says goodbye to the two, and finally, the gentlemen leave in a very pleasant atmosphere. With this, the boy is happy that the two have become so close, and Bob begins to cry at such a beautiful scene. To tease his friend, the hero asks if the blonde is jealous, and Bob denies it, leading to a playful argument between the two. After a few moments, the assistant's greatest fear started approaching the restaurant. Lee notices the change in his colleague's behavior and asks the reason for it. Then Bella explains that the ghostly maiden boss will arrive in about 2 minutes. However, it is not yet time to open, and that's why the blonde becomes increasingly confused. Anyway, since all the ingredients are prepared, Ba asks to be called after Kim leaves, and he quickly runs out of the place, leaving Lee alone to greet her. As expected, Kim arrives, but the footsteps indicate the presence of another person. Naturally, Lee welcomes them properly, and the guest is revealed to be the lost girl, Yerim. With this, the hero is very happy and starts to examine the girl up close, making her ask if something is wrong. And obviously there was, because during all this time, the protagonist was extremely worried. Lee cried because all this time he thought it was his fault, and from afar, Kim disapproved of this behavior. She had told Lee to make distinctions and not give his heart to ghosts, but the girl had already given up on stopping him. 10 minutes later, after much crying, Lee brings some glasses to the table and asks how the two got together. In response, Kim explains that she brought the girl there, so Lee asks where the girl ended up. Incredibly, she replies that she ended up in North Korea. Naturally, she was also surprised because besides the abandoned house, all she could see were mountains and fields. So she was walking in the direction she thought was south, and the night before, Kim found her. Lee, in turn, asks if Kim has been looking for Yerim all this time, and she replies yes. In this case, the hero thanks her and asks to repay her for this favor in some way. Since she is a simple woman, she says she will accept gratitude in the form of a meal. Before anything else, the protagonist asks for patience as he will serve the drinks first. Yerim also hadn't eaten anything, and since Kim brought her there, she expects the cook to feed her. Obviously, Lee takes on this commitment, and to repay Kim, he thinks he can't just serve a simple soju. But fortunately, there was a drink he had received a little while ago that would be perfect for this moment. After preparing the dishes, the hero first serves Yerim with omuras and tteokbokki, and for Madame Soye, stir-fried pork with garlic and alcohol is served, which surprises Yerim. While Kim opens the drink, she asks the girl to go ahead and eat everything. And strangely, Lee notices that the girl receives some etiquette training before coming to the restaurant. After opening the bottle and tasting a little, Soye notices that this alcohol is not the simple soju. Seeing this, Lee asks how it is and explains that it's a homemade alcohol made by someone he knows. Continuing, he explained that they said it was good, which is why the bottle was served to Kim. Fortunately, the girl approves of the drink, which makes the hero quite satisfied with Wununjung's work. Additionally, he offers an apple he got from Mr. Du Chi, which is described as delicious. Initially, it seems strange, but the two decide to try a peach because of the effort. And the moment they eat it, they are amazed by the taste, which is truly delicious. However, they don't know if the good taste is just because they haven't eaten apples for a long time. Anyway, Kim said that since they are something you couldn't eat here, they would surely be delicious. This even makes Lee wonder if they are just normal apples, and soon Soe gets up to leave. That's because if this child wants to go to her hometown, the two should start moving as quickly as possible. Therefore, Yerim also gets up, and before leaving, she thanks Lee for cooking for her a second time. She explained that the ramen made at the retreat was great, but eating at the restaurant was even better. With this, she promises that next time she will bring her friends so that they all can enjoy it together. And with a smile, Lee says he is looking forward to that day. Finally, the farewell gives the cook a great sense of satisfaction. After the girls leave, the hero thinks about it a little and believes that young Sue will really like this. Later at the restaurant, all customers are served with attention and quality. One of them asks if the cook forgot that he ordered an egg roll, and Lee promptly goes to prepare it. Ba, however, was thoughtful about this order, and Lee brought his assistant back to reality as he was daydreaming. In response, the blonde pointed out that the restaurant was emptier than usual. However, the comment isn't initially understood since the restaurant is completely full. But among the tables, one was empty, precisely the one that belonged to Chil Hyung, who has been missing for days. After the end of the shift, Lee tried to test this by attempting to summon Choi Ho Chil from the rooftop, but no one came. In this case, Ba thinks it's relevant to suggest that the ghost might be working. Naturally, it is questioned what kind of work this would be, and the boy comments that ghosts are also busy. However, for the assistant, watching people was an occupation, which obviously didn't make much sense. As a last resort, Ba suggests that the boy might have ascended. And even though only 2 weeks have passed, there is no fixed time for ascension. Seeing this, Lee thought that in the past, he would have been nervous not to see his old friend anymore. But after all the lectures he received, the boy managed to maintain a calmer demeanor. Anyway, the hero says there shouldn't be a way to know if the boy ascended to heaven or not. But Bae surprises him by knowing a way to check this, one that is closer than Lee expects. Answering a call, the employee from JS Finance asks what the problem is. And with a bad debtor, he explains that even after death, there is still a privacy law, so he cannot provide information. In this case, he asks if it will be difficult to find out about someone's ascension. However, Duchi believes that if that's the question, he can find out in an instant. With that, after checking his papers, it is reported that Mr. Choi Ho-chil has not yet ascended. And unfortunately, only this information can be given, but it is already enough for our hero. And before he could hang up, Duchi asked for a moment because he had something he wanted to report to the boy. Promptly, the cook asks what matter the employee wishes to discuss with him. In response, Yuji asks the hero to come to his bank at least once. Obviously, this summons is interpreted incorrectly by the boy, who starts to get scared. Then the JS Finance employee explains that Lee will not die if he comes to visit them. That's because since he took over the restaurant of the afterlife and stepped into this world, it would be useful to see how the bank works. And perhaps if the hero saw the afterlife with his own eyes, he could better understand the people from there. Seeing this, Lee realizes that his business is closed and therefore he has time, but he asks how he can do it. With that, Duchi explains that there is a way to get there using the basement of the building. It is said that simply by placing the business card on the basement door, he will be able to go. The hero believes it is a magical passage, but Duchi prefers to call it the science of the afterlife. Finally, Lee thanks him, as for a moment, he thought his dear friend had left without saying goodbye. However, Ba says that the man is just like someone who has ascended because now they don't even know where he is. This saddens Lee, and seeing such a sad expression on his colleague's face, the blonde says he will ask about Cheol and the surrounding areas. This statement revives the protagonist, and now the hero can visit JS Finance without worries. Finally, the two say goodbye and each goes in opposite directions to carry out their tasks. When he arrives at the basement, the boy finds himself deep in thought, realizing he can access such a place with just a simple card. There are many stories of living people crossing over to the afterlife, like the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, or the story of Princess Bari and the tales of the living crossing over to the realm of the dead. They are always depicted as incredibly difficult and dangerous. So the hero always imagined that the journey to JS Finance would be tremendous, but everything is wrong. That's because the moment he crosses the door with the card, he falls into a blank, empty space. Looking around, he doesn't understand what is happening, and without delay, someone opens a door. Then several others follow this example, and they all start falling into the same space as the protagonist. And as a logical effect, that crowd of people passing through it makes Lee struggle to stay standing. But among these people was Du Chi, who quickly came to his rescue. The employee, in turn, commented that the boy almost got sucked in and asked what his first impression was. In response, Lee said that everything was incredible, despite feeling like he was in a strange and different world. With that, Duchi explains that first-time visitors are always quite surprised. Changing the subject, the hero asks if all the people who come here have already passed away. In response, he is told that many who work in the afterlife also come and go to this place. After all, the afterlife is also a society and one that cannot exist without people. And this makes the boy realize that death is not a complete end, but rather a new beginning. Anyway, the size of the line impresses Lee, and at this moment, he remembers what his friend once said. Because in front of him, he's finally seeing the line that all ghosts fear. It is said that JS Finance intentionally set it up this way to consume the ghost's time because, in the end, time is money. After some time among strange and giant ghosts, the two finally arrive at JS Finance. In the end, the door seems quite modest, and Duchi explains that it is a branch. Lee thinks the entrance looks ordinary, but still, this is one of the places that ghosts fear. Therefore, he prepares himself not to panic, regardless of what he sees inside. But upon entering, everything's quite different, and Duchi welcomes the hero very kindly. As expected, the underworld always surprises with things beyond common sense. As his first impression, the protagonist compliments the place, which, despite being small, is very cozy. Anyway, since a very important guest is at the location, Duchi offers a cup of coffee. He explains that the hot grass from hell has a wonderful warming power, making it perfect for roasting coffee beans. And the soda is a drink made from water mixed with honey harvested from Sushin in the flower garden of the underworld. With this, the hero comments that all of this is very similar to the world above. And Duchi asks the boy to taste it before comparing the two places so quickly. So Lee drinks a bit of both and realizes that it is much tastier than he expected. Then he recalls that Duchi had something for him and asks if this was it. But what the boy was going to give was something that is generally used after death. However, since the boss is alive and has a connection to the place, Duchi decides to give him a debit card linked to the JS account. This impresses Lee, and the employee asks if the cook wants to check the balance. However, Lee decides not to check because if there's a lot of money, he might develop bad habits, and if there's none, he might get anxious. Putting all that aside, the hero has a question to ask. He then asks if it's possible to buy foods from the underworld with this card's debit. In response, Yuchai is happy that the boy likes it and explains that those things can be bought without any problems. Additionally, he mentions that there is a store in this building where customers stop by before returning to the underworld. It resembles a supermarket, or better said, a convenience store. Later, Duchi introduces the 7 best-selling products from the store selected by the Underworld magazine. In the end, it was extremely similar to the convenience stores in the world of the living, and the employee is willing to answer any questions, so Lee notices that the store sells ramen as well as lunchboxes and dried meat. However, the fact that the store sells ointments as well as kitchen knives cause a lot of confusion. And then, in response, Yuchi makes an excuse, saying it's a convenience store, which doesn't make any sense. Anyway, these are the best-selling items in the underworld, and the top seller is said to be Hell's underwear. It's said to be so warm that even passing through the frozen hell, you can still get heat stroke. Next, they have the ointment that regenerates your limbs even if your arms and legs are cut off. And lastly, the third best seller is the inspection knife made from the leaves of the Hellblades. It may be hard to maintain, but it can cut a thick radish, the cutting board, and even annoying customers all at once. Duchi has heard that everyone who runs a restaurant in the afterlife has one of these. Changing the subject, the hero recalls what was said about hell, which is the place you go to after the final judgment. With that, the JS Finance employee decides to explain the situation to the newcomer. He explains that there is a separate place where sins committed in the world above are judged. To simplify, you can think of the gates and paths you go through to receive judgment as hell. Then the true hell begins after you are judged. With this in mind, Lee asks about other places like the frozen hell and the hell of blades. He is told that the freezing cold of the first makes it feel like your skin is going to fall off, and the forest of blades that strips your flesh are merely waiting rooms. And that's why various items are being developed by the ghost's survival instinct. With that, Duchi asks if the boy has already chosen everything he wants to buy. But by this point, Lee has already lost all his desire due to the terror of the place described as hell. A short time later, our hero leaves the store with a lot of purchases and is very happy. At the end of the shopping, the JS Finance employee asks how Lee feels about using his card. Then the hero explains that it feels a little strange because it doesn't feel like his money. Finally, because Duchi was very helpful with the guidance, the hero gives him an apple as thanks. But this is said to be good because it comes directly from the hell of the tongue-ripping mountain. Initially, Lee accepts the compliment, but he had no idea that this fruit came from such a place. With that, it's explained that the tongue-ripping hell is one of those managed by King Yamra, with famous ingredients. In this case, Lee asks if this is a hell where people pay for their sins through agriculture. And Duchai interprets this as a joke, because the sinners don't farm, they become the fields. This is the actor saying that, in other words, it is to judge the sin of humans in harming others with their tongues. For those who cannot pass because of their verbal sins, their tongues are stretched out and used as agricultural fields. And that's why this place is called the tongue-ripping hell. Given this explanation, it's easy to see that these apples are grown on the stretched tongues. And normally, about 100 apple trees are planted on each person's tongue. Moreover, at the beginning of the century, many people with oily tongues entered, and so the harvest has been great. Therefore, Duchi explains that no matter how many different items a person prepares for the afterlife, what's most important is to take care of them while still alive, living life in the best possible way. And after facing the cruelty of hell, Lee assures him that he will follow this advice. Changing the subject, one more thing needed to be mentioned by Duchai. He asks the hero to consume the items he bought, explaining that since they are foods from the underworld, people from above can be influenced. Like the example of Persephone, which Duchi adds, saying that unlike the living, the dead are not part of this game. Finally, Lee's stay at JS Finance comes to an end, and he says goodbye to return home. However, when he tried to open the door, it didn't respond to his command. Duchi quickly explained that a key is also needed to return to the real world. However, this key wasn't just a business card, but his own memories. It's said that if Lee thinks of any door and imagines himself entering it without being refused, it will open. This means it's a place that only the boy can access because the house is connected to the soul of the person. With this, he is asked which house Lee would like to think of. Hearing this, the hero begins to reflect on his entire life to return to his memories. Recalling all the steps he has taken so far, Lee starts to search for the place he needs to return to. And after some time, he finally comes to the conclusion about where he belongs. So inevitably, the hero returned to the restaurant, as was to be expected. It was fascinating because even though he had started working there recently, he was already familiar with this place. However, he admits he is tired after the whole trip and wonders if Young-soo has already found Ha Kil-hyun. At that time, the protagonist didn't know many things happening around him. He believed that since his friend was a ghost, he would find the way better than he could. Innocent thoughts like Hyung not appearing because he was busy with other things were something that frequently crossed his mind. But Lee had little idea of what was truly happening, and it wasn't the time to be lost in carefree thoughts. Later in the city, among a crowd of people, a malevolent being walks without a defined direction. This is a female ghost who seems to be completely corrupted and yet continues to cry out for help. Even after wandering through the city, Boss still hasn't found where the hero's friend is. And soon he realizes that, unfortunately, another day has been lost in this search. However, just as he was about to leave, he came across the same ghost as before, exuding an immense malevolent aura. After she passes by Ba with a living person, the boy wonders how someone can live with a spirit like that nearby. Without delay, he continues his way home, but from behind a wall, Hyung is found. With this, the blonde points to the ghost, very happy to have completed his mission. However, Hyung quickly approaches and covers Ba's mouth, telling him to keep quiet. Later, Lee hears the story and understands that his friend was following that evil man. But the blonde warns that following a living person with a haunting ghost has a negative effect on both. In any case, Hyung says this doesn't need to be reminded because he experienced it firsthand. However, the hero still doesn't know who this person being followed is, and he explains that he was worried about not seeing his friend. In response, the boy said he didn't go to the restaurant on purpose because he knew Lee would feel this way. Anyway, Hyung disappeared for days, and that was more than enough reason to be worried and upset. Seeing this, the hero asked if nothing that was happening could really be told. And the boy replied, saying it was still something he couldn't resolve. So Lee promptly offered to help with what the boy was doing, which left him startled. Our hero didn't even know what it was about, but still, he was willing to help out of consideration for his friend. However, Hyung refuses the offer of help because it's too dangerous to share the responsibility. However, after much insistence, the boy decides to tell him but explains he isn't doing it to get help. At this moment, he is not just following a suspect with a bad reputation. He's also investigating a serial murder case in the city of Cheolseon. This case was in the news for several days a few years ago, and the bodies were found. There was no evidence against the suspect. Then it is said that the one Hyung is following now is the culprit of this incident. That's because, even without evidence, the boy still knows the faces of the victims, and he says he will never forget them. The victims became ghosts and stayed with that man, but now there are more ghosts than the officially announced victims. With this, seeing how the victims ended up in the afterlife due to the resentment caused, Hyung is determined not to stand still any longer. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.